What if I told you one of the most advanced civilizations to ever exist has been completely erased from history? Not by war, not by some great cataclysm, but by something far more mysterious: silence. The simple, relentless passage of time. Across centuries, this shadow empire built monumental cities, developed technologies that would not be seen again for millennia, and created a culture so rich and complex that its influence quietly seeped into the world that came after it. And yet today, we don't even know its name. Its people are ghosts. Its achievements are whispers. Its story is one of the most haunting puzzles ever left behind by the ancient world. Think about that for a moment. We can name the Romans, the Egyptians, the Greek societies whose histories fill libraries, but this civilization, it's different. It's a phantom, a society that mastered its environment, traded across continents, and expressed such artistic and spiritual depth that its absence feels almost like a theft from humanity's collective memory. And the most compelling part, this wasn't some minor culture lost in a remote corner of the globe. This was an empire, a power, a beacon, and then it was gone. Not in fire and ash, but in quietness, fading from view like a star burning out in some distant galaxy, leaving behind only a trace of light for us to follow. That's the journey we begin today. Together, we're going to trace the footsteps of this forgotten world. We'll walk through its silent cities, stand before temples that have not heard a human voice in thousands of years, and try to read stories told in stones that no living person can fully understand. We'll meet the archaeologists, linguists, and historians who have dedicated their lives to listening to what this civilization left behind, not in grand declarations, but in fragments. In clues, in the quiet spaces between what was written and what was lost. This is more than a history lesson. It's a detective story, a deep and meaningful exploration into how entire worlds can disappear and why their echoes still matter, perhaps now more than ever. So let's begin. To understand how a civilization can vanish so completely, we must first travel back to its very beginning, to a time of emergence and incredible potential. Picture a vast, fertile river valley, a lush landscape cradled between protective mountain ranges. This was the cradle, the nurturing heartland where our shadow empire first took root. Unlike the sudden, explosive rise of some ancient cultures, this society's dawn was a gradual awakening, a slow burn of innovation that would eventually ignite into a brilliant flame. The people who settled here were not just farmers, they were visionaries who learned to harness the annual floods of the great river, turning the rich silt into agricultural abundance. This mastery over water wasn't just about survival, it was the first step toward an unprecedented surplus of food, which in turn freed up human energy for something far more complex, building a civilization. With a stable food supply secured, this culture began to distinguish itself in remarkable ways. They developed a unique architectural style that was both monumental and precise. We're not talking about simple mud brick huts. We're talking about grand, geometrically perfect structures that aligned with celestial bodies. Their early temples, built from precisely cut stone without the use of mortar, show an understanding of engineering and astronomy that seems to defy their era. At the same time, a distinct system of governance began to form. Unlike the god-kings of Egypt or the emperor-priests of other ancient societies, evidence suggests their leadership may have been more communal, perhaps a council of elders or wise individuals who guided the people based on a blend of practical knowledge and spiritual understanding. This unique social contract fostered a culture of incredible artisanship, producing pottery, textiles, and metalwork of such fine quality that these items would become highly sought-after treasures in trade networks stretching for thousands of miles. We catch our clearest glimpses of this golden age from a handful of key archaeological sites that have, against all odds, partially resisted the consuming silence of time. The city now known to archaeologists as Site Alpha is perhaps the most revealing. Here, the foundations of a sprawling urban center are laid out with a grid-like precision that suggests advanced city planning. Excavations have uncovered not just palaces and temples, but extensive workshop districts, public granaries, and even what appears to be an early form of a drainage and freshwater system. Then there is the Temple of the Sunken Plaza, a ritual complex carved directly into the living rock of a mountainside. Its central courtyard, sunk deep into the earth, is surrounded by pillars adorned with intricate carvings of animals and celestial patterns, artifacts that whisper of a rich mythological tradition and a deep reverence for the natural world. These places are more than just ruins, they are frozen moments, snapshots of a society operating at its peak. This brings us to the core of the name, the Shadow Empire. Why call it that? It's a title born from a frustrating and fascinating contradiction. On one hand, the material evidence, the artifacts, the trade goods found in distant lands, the architectural influences seen in later cultures points to a society of immense influence and reach. Their pottery styles are PPERR Chinese letter ED 1,000 miles away. Their unique metallurgical techniques seem to have been adopted, though imperfectly, by neighboring peoples. Their shadow, in a sense, was cast long and far across the ancient world, and yet the source of that shadow remains elusive, shrouded in mist. We have no grand royal chronicles boasting of their conquests. No stone stelae carved with the biographies of their great leaders. The very people who were clearly so influential left behind a startling lack of self-authored history. They are a silhouette without a clear body, an echo without a definitive source of the sound. This foundational period, for all its brilliance, is where the mystery truly begins, setting the stage for the central question: how does an empire that cast such a long shadow manage to disappear into one? To truly grasp the scale of this vanished society, we must first understand the stage upon which its drama unfolded, a geographical heartland of breathtaking diversity and strategic genius. This was not a civilization confined to a single valley or a lonely stretch of coast. It was an empire woven into the very fabric of a complex and bountiful landscape. At its core lay a vast alluvial plain, a gift from a mighty winding river system that we know today only by the name given to its dusty remains, the Sunken Serpent River. Each year, predictable floods would drench the plains in mineral-rich silt, creating some of the most fertile farmlands the ancient world had ever seen. It was this agricultural engine, this ability to produce massive food surpluses with almost clockwork reliability, that provided the fundamental fuel for everything that followed. Population could boom, labor could be specialized, a simple farming society could, over generations, evolve into something far more complex and ambitious. But the genius of this civilization's placement went far beyond simple fertility. Their territory was a natural fortress and a trading crossroads, all in one. To the north and east, jagged, mineral-rich mountain ranges acted as both a protective barrier and a literal gold mine of resources. These mountains were the source of the copper, tin, and precious stones that would make their artisans famous across the continent. To the west, a great, shallow sea teeming with marine life offered not just sustenance but a highway for coastal trade. And cutting through the very center of it all was the Sunken Serpent River itself, the empire's main artery. Goods, ideas, and people moved along its length with an efficiency that would not be matched for thousands of years. This perfect interplay of geography, productive farmland, defensible borders, and accessible trade routes created a kind of perfect storm for cultural and economic explosion. We can see the evidence of this sophisticated relationship with the land in the specific locations they chose for their greatest cities. Take, for example, the metropolis modern archaeologists call Careth-El, a name borrowed from a much later local legend. Its ruins, now half buried by the sands of a relentless desert that was once a grassland, were strategically positioned at the precise point where the river's main channel met a crucial overland trade route coming down from the mountains. This wasn't an accident. Careth-El was a gateway city, a place where highland minerals, lowland grains, and exotic goods from across the sea would all converge, be processed, and be sent back out into the world. The city's layout reflects this. Vast warehouses and market squares make up nearly a third of the excavated area, far more than the space dedicated to palaces or temples. This was a city built on commerce, its fortunes rising and falling with the tides of trade. Another key site, the ceremonial center known as the Twin Peaks Sanctuary, tells a different but equally important geographical story. Perched high in a sacred valley within those protective northern mountains, this was not a city of trade but a city of the spirit. Its builders chose a location with a commanding view of the heavens, aligning its central observatory with specific celestial events like the summer solstice sunrise. The choice of this remote, dramatic location speaks volumes about their culture. It tells us that their identity was not solely tied to river and field. It was also rooted in the awe-inspiring power of the high peaks and the cycles of the cosmos. The difficulty of transporting the massive stone blocks up to this sanctuary also reveals a society with immense organizational power and a deep, unwavering commitment to its spiritual beliefs. The geography here shaped not just their economy but their very soul. However, this intimate bond with the land also contained the seeds of potential vulnerability. Geologists studying soil cores and sediment layers have uncovered a troubling narrative of environmental change. For centuries, the climate was stable and generous. But around the time the civilization's influence began to wane, the data tells a story of creeping, insidious shift. Tree ring samples from ancient, preserved logs show a pattern of prolonged and worsening droughts. The once predictable floods of the sunken Serpent River became erratic, sometimes failing entirely for years on end, other times arriving with catastrophic, destructive fury. The grasslands that buffered the western deserts began to dry out, allowing the sands to advance slowly, season by season, swallowing farmlands and settlements on the empire's periphery. This wasn't a single apocalyptic event. It was a slow-motion squeeze, a gradual tightening of environmental pressures that would have placed unimaginable strain on the very systems that made the empire great. Historians and climatologists now work hand in hand to piece together this story. Dr. Elena Vance, a paleoclimatologist who has spent decades drilling cores from ancient lake beds in the region, describes it as a fracture of fundamentals. She argues they built a magnificent, intricate machine perfectly calibrated for a specific climate. When that climate began to change, the machine started to break down. A drought meant not just hunger, but a collapse in the agricultural surplus that funded their government, their armies, and their arts. A bad flood could wipe out the granaries that were supposed to see them through the lean years. Their greatest strength, their deep integration with their environment, became their greatest weakness. This perspective transforms our understanding of their silence. It suggests their disappearance may not have been a sudden conquest, but a slow unraveling, a fading away as the very land that nurtured them turned increasingly hostile. forcing a retreat, a fragmentation, and ultimately a forgetting. The heartland that gave them life may have also been the author of their quietus. If the fertile plains and strategic mountains were the empire's body, then its architecture was its soaring spirit, a physical declaration of genius carved in stone and baked in clay. We move now from the landscape that supported them to the breathtaking structures they raised against the sky, monuments so advanced, so perfectly conceived, that they continue to baffle and inspire modern engineers. This was not a culture that simply built shelters. They engineered experiences, weaving together religion, astronomy, and daily life into a built environment of staggering complexity. Their cities were not organic growths of tangled streets, but masterpieces of intentional design. The most striking example is the urban plan of Kareth-El, which we mentioned earlier. Excavations reveal a city laid out on a precise grid system, with wide main avenues running true north-south and east-west, intersecting with smaller residential streets. This wasn't just for order, it was a form of social engineering. The main thoroughfares facilitated the movement of goods and people to the central markets and granaries, ensuring the economic heart of the city beat strong, while the smaller lanes created quiet, community-focused neighborhoods. This level of urban planning, with designated residential, commercial, and ritual districts, demonstrates an administrative mind capable of thinking generations ahead. But the true marvels lie in the individual structures, and none is more iconic than the so-called Pyramid of the Silent Sun. Unlike the pointed pyramids of Giza, this ziggurat-like structure rises in 7 vast concentric terraces, each faced with a different colored stone imported from distant quarries. The construction technique is a mystery that still sparks debate. The stones are massive, some weighing over 15 tons, and they are fitted together with such precision that a razor blade cannot be inserted between them, all without a single drop of mortar. The entire edifice is also a giant calendar. On the spring and autumn equinoxes, the shadow cast by the highest terrace perfectly bisects the grand staircase leading to the summit. Archaeologist Dr. Aris Thorne, who has led the excavation there for 20 years, describes it as a machine made of stone. It's not just a temple, he says. It's a cosmological statement. The alignment isn't a happy accident, it's the entire point. The building tells us they understood solar cycles with an accuracy we wouldn't see again in this part of the world for another 2,000 years. They were binding their rituals to the very turning of the heavens. This sophistication extended far beyond the ceremonial and into the profoundly practical, revealing a society that cared for the well-being of its citizens in ways that were revolutionary for the time. Beneath the streets of their cities, engineers constructed the most advanced water management system of the ancient world. At sites like Kareth-El, archaeologists have uncovered a network of covered, graded drains made of fired clay pipes, complete with inspection shafts and sedimentation tanks to filter debris. These weren't just simple ditches, they were part of an integrated system that included public fountains, cisterns for rainwater collection, and even clay pipes that channeled fresh water into the homes of the elite. In the residential quarter, they found a building with a small, tiled room featuring a channeled drain in the floor, what appears to be one of the world's earliest known indoor bathing areas. This focus on sanitation and public health suggests a collective value placed on cleanliness and the prevention of disease, a concept that would be lost and then painfully rediscovered millennia later. The materials they used tell a story of both luxury and ingenuity. While they used local sandstone and limestone for much of their construction, for their most important buildings, they sought out something special. A unique volcanic glass-like rock called obsidian for razor-sharp tools and intricate carvings, and a brilliantly blue stone called lapis lazuli, transported over thousands of miles from a single mountain source to create dazzling inlays, eyes of statues, and to decorate the walls of palaces. Perhaps their most surprising innovation was in their humble brick. While sun-dried mud brick was common across the ancient world, their engineers developed a method of firing bricks in kilns at extremely high temperatures, creating a building material of incredible durability and uniformity. It is these fired bricks, not the stone of the pyramids, that form the walls of their vast granaries and the foundations of their homes, allowing those structures to survive millennia of floods and erosion when other contemporary buildings simply melted back into the earth. Ultimately, every arch, every wall, every carefully laid street speaks to us about the people who built them. The grand scale of the temples and the opulent materials of the palaces speak of a powerful, likely theocratic, ruling class with the ability to command vast labor and resources. The uniformity and quality of the housing for commoners suggest a society with a strong middle class of artisans and traders who enjoyed a certain level of prosperity and stability. The elaborate drainage systems and public wells point to a communal ethos, an understanding that the health of the individual benefited the whole. These structures are their voice. In the absence of deciphered texts, the architecture is our most eloquent witness. It tells us of a people who were not only brilliant engineers and keen astronomers, but who also valued order, beauty, and the collective good, creating a world of stone and light whose silence somehow speaks louder than the boasts of any conquering king carved on a monument. Their grand architecture stands as a silent testament to their genius, but if we truly wish to hear their voices, we must turn to the marks they left behind, the cryptic inscriptions and mysterious symbols carved into temple walls, pressed onto clay tablets, and etched onto everyday objects. This is the empire's written word, a puzzle that has become one of the greatest challenges in modern archaeology. Unlike the Rosetta Stone, which provided a clear key to Egyptian hieroglyphs, the script of this shadow empire offers no such gift. It appears to be a completely isolated writing system, unrelated to any known language family, a unique creation that flourished and then died with its creators. The characters are a beautiful and frustrating mix of logographic and phonetic signs. Some are clear, elegant pictures of animals, celestial bodies, or tools, while others are abstract, geometric shapes whose meaning is utterly lost to us. Finding these texts is like discovering a library where every book is locked and the key has been thrown away. The challenge of decipherment is monumental, a task that has consumed the careers of brilliant linguists and cryptographers. The core of the problem is the lack of a bilingual text. Without a known language like Greek or Akkadian to use as a translation bridge, scholars are essentially working in the dark. They can't even be certain what language the script represents. Is it an isolate, a tongue with no living relatives, or is it an early, pure form of a language that later evolved into something we might recognize? The process is painstakingly slow, relying on pattern recognition, statistical analysis of sign frequencies, and context clues from where the inscriptions were found. A tablet discovered in a grain storage room, covered in numerical notations and repeating signs, is likely an inventory list, a long, beautifully carved text surrounding the statue of a regal figure probably sings his praises or details his divine mandate to rule. But moving from these educated guesses to a true understanding of the grammar and vocabulary has proven elusive. It is a linguistic wall that has so far remained unbreached. This struggle mirrors other famous decipherment stories, but with a crucial, more difficult twist. The Mayan glyphs, for instance, were eventually unlocked because the Maya themselves left behind descendants who still spoke related languages, and because Spanish colonists recorded aspects of the culture. The Linear B script of the Mycenaeans was cracked in the 1950s because it was shown to be an early form of Greek. For our shadow empire, there are no such lifelines. There are no colonial records, no continuous cultural memory, no obvious linguistic cousins. The silence surrounding them is almost total. This makes their script more enigmatic than even the undeciphered linear of the Minoans or the ancient Indus Valley script. It is a system of communication that reflects a world entirely separate from our own, a way of thinking frozen in time, waiting for its code to be broken. Yet there have been moments of breathtaking excitement, flashes of light in the darkness. One of the most significant breakthroughs came not from a grand royal inscription, but from a humble clay ball found in a merchant's house in Kareth El. The ball, when cracked open, was found to contain 49 small clay tokens of different shapes, spheres, discs, pyramids, and was accompanied by a clay tablet. The tablet bore an inscription that seemed to list the tokens inside, each sign matched with a specific numeral. This was essentially a signed receipt, a way for a merchant to verify a shipment or a tax payment. By comparing the physical tokens to the signs on the tablet, researchers could confidently identify the numerical system and the signs for basic commodities like grain, oil, and livestock. It was a tiny key, but it unlocked an entire domain of their lives, economics. We now know they had a sophisticated base 60 numerical system, similar to the later Babylonians, and could perform complex calculations for trade and storage. Other fragments offer glimpses into their spiritual world. A recurring set of symbols appears on temple doorways and ritual vessels, a circle crossed by a wavy line, often alongside a stylized bird and a plant-like sign. The context strongly suggests a religious or cosmological meaning. Some scholars, noting its placement near water channels and granaries, theorize it represents a blessing for abundance, a prayer to a deity of water and growth. Another series of inscriptions found on a set of funerary urns always begins with the same 3 characters, followed by a unique sequence. This is likely a common funerary formula, perhaps akin to "Here lies" or "Rest in peace," giving us a poignant, if incomplete, window into their attitudes toward death and the afterlife. These aren't full sentences, but they are whispers of their deepest beliefs. What does it mean for a civilization to be so thoroughly silenced? When a language dies, it doesn't just take words with it. It extinguishes an entire universe of thought, poetry, law, and humor. We can admire their pyramids and wonder at their plumbing, but without their words, we are forever separated from their humanity. We will never read their epic poems, their love songs, their jokes, or their private letters. We will never know the name they called themselves or the names of their gods. This profound loss is a haunting reminder of the fragility of memory itself. These stone fragments are more than just historical data. They are a testament to resilience. The very fact that they tried to write, to record, to communicate across the ages shows a deep desire to be remembered. Their struggle against oblivion is carved into every glyph, a silent scream against the silence that eventually consumed them. Our struggle to understand them is an answer to that call, a promise to listen, even now, for the echoes of their voices. While their grand structures and silent scripts speak of a sophisticated culture, it was the relentless, humming engine of their economy that truly powered this civilization's rise and sustained its brilliance for centuries. To understand how they achieved such heights, we must follow the flow of goods and wealth, from the fertile fields that fed the masses to the intricate trade routes that connected them to a world they would never see. This was not a subsistence economy. It was a complex, interconnected system of production, distribution, and consumption that generated immense surplus, funding everything from the pyramid's construction to the artisan's workshop. At its heart was a revolutionary agricultural practice centered on the sunken Serpent River. Farmers didn't just wait for the annual flood, they mastered it. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence of a vast and sophisticated irrigation network, canals, levees, and reservoirs that allowed them to extend the river's bounty far beyond its natural banks, creating multiple growing seasons each year. They cultivated a resilient, high-yield strain of grain, along with legumes, dates, and flax, creating a diverse and nutritious food basket that could support a large, non-farming population. This agricultural surplus was the fundamental fuel, the calories that freed people to become masons, priests, scribes, soldiers, and merchants. This surplus did not just sit in granaries, it was the capital that launched 1,000 industries. The empire became a powerhouse of craftsmanship, with entire city districts dedicated to specialized production. In the fire-blackened ruins of Karath El's artisan quarter, excavators found workshops for everything from delicate lapidary work to massive copper smelting. One particularly telling discovery was a street where every building showed evidence of textile production. Clay spindle walls and loom weights littered the floors, and mineral analysis of staining on ceramic vats identified the use of complex dyes, a vibrant Tyrian purple from sea snails imported from the coast, and a brilliant crimson made from a specific desert insect. This wasn't just domestic weaving for clothing. This was organized, industrial-scale production of luxury goods for export. The quality of their textiles, evidenced by rare fragments preserved in dry, sealed tombs, was extraordinary, becoming a coveted commodity across the ancient world and a major source of their wealth. The real economic magic, however, happened in the movement of these goods. The Shadow Empire was a nexus of long-distance trade, a central hub in a network that stretched for thousands of miles. Their merchants, or perhaps a centralized guild acting on behalf of the ruling class, established routes that reached in all directions. To the north, donkey caravans wound through mountain passes to acquire tin and silver, essential for making bronze. To the south, boats sailed down the coast trading for exotic woods, ivory, and incense. But their most astonishing connection was to the east, across a vast and unforgiving desert. There, at a remote oasis outpost now called Waystation Gamma, archaeologists found a trove of evidence, seals and accounting tablets from the Heartland alongside artifacts unmistakably from a civilization on the distant Eastern Sea. This proves they were part of a trade chain so long that goods and ideas could travel from one end of the known world to the other, with their cities acting as the critical middleman. They didn't just make things, they moved things and they taxed things, growing wealthy on the flow of commerce itself. The commodities that fueled this system were both practical and profoundly luxurious. The most important was undoubtedly grain, the standardized unit of value that was used to pay laborers and was stored in vast state-run granaries as a buffer against famine. But beyond this staple, their wealth was built on rarities. They controlled the only known source of a unique volcanic glass that could be knapped to an edge sharper than modern steel, making it invaluable for ritual blades, surgical tools, and as a high-status trade good. Then there was the lapis lazuli. This deep blue stone, flecked with gold like pyrite, came from a single remote mountain source thousands of miles away, yet it appears everywhere in their high-status artifacts. The logistics of acquiring it, the treaties with intermediary tribes, the protected caravan routes, the sheer cost must have been enormous. Controlling the supply of lapis gave them a near monopoly on one of the most desired status symbols in the ancient world, a stone more valuable than gold in many contemporary cultures. They also traded in finely crafted bronze tools, dyed woolen textiles, and fragrant oils, creating a diverse economic portfolio that was the envy of their neighbors. The physical evidence of this economic machine is best seen in the ruins of the central granary of Karath El, a sprawling mud brick complex on the riverbank. Excavations revealed not just one large silo, but a series of 22 standardized circular storage bins, each capable of holding enough grain to feed hundreds of people for a year. The floor was designed with a raised central platform and air vents to prevent moisture and rot, and clay tablets found in an adjacent office recorded inflows and outflows with meticulous detail, noting deductions for taxes, payments to workers, and reserves for emergencies. This was more than a warehouse. It was the Federal Reserve of its day, a state-controlled institution that regulated the primary currency of the realm, stabilized the economy against shocks, and demonstrated the overwhelming power and organizational capacity of the central authority. Its scale is a direct reflection of the empire's economic might. This very strength, however, may have contained the seeds of a devastating fragility. Economist Dr. Ben Carter, who has modeled ancient systems, suggests their economy was a masterpiece of efficiency but dangerously inflexible. They built a perfect system for a perfect world, he explains. Their wealth was based on predictable river floods, stable trade routes, and a constant demand for their luxury goods. It was a house of cards, albeit a magnificent one. If any of those pillars trembled, if a drought reduced the agricultural surplus, if a new power arose to block a trade route, if tastes changed and lapis lazuli fell out of fashion, the entire intricate structure was at risk. They lacked economic diversity. There's little evidence of a significant pastoral or fishing economy to fall back on. For example, when the good times ended, the crash would have been swift and total. This perspective turns our understanding of their silence on its head. Their disappearance may not have begun with a foreign invasion or a single catastrophe, but with a quiet economic collapse. A trade route severed by a new warlord in the mountains would have cut off the supply of tin, crippling their bronze industry. A series of bad floods would have emptied those granaries, bankrupting the state and leading to civil unrest. The prosperity that built the soaring temples could have evaporated within a generation, leaving behind not ruins destroyed by war, but empty cities abandoned by a people who could no longer feed themselves or maintain the complex system that defined their world. The economic foundations, so solid for centuries, ultimately proved to be built on sand. Beyond the bustling markets and the precise geometry of their cities lay another, more profound dimension of this civilization, a spiritual world so rich and complex that it permeated every aspect of existence, from the grandest temple ceremony to the simplest meal in a farmer's home. To understand the soul of the Shadow Empire, we must step inside their sacred spaces and listen for the echoes of their beliefs, a system that wove together the cosmos, the community, and the individual into a single, seamless tapestry of meaning. Their religion was not a separate part of life. It was the very fabric of life itself, the invisible framework that gave order to the universe and purpose to human endeavor. The most vivid window into this world comes from their art, which was never merely decorative. Every image, every symbol, every carefully chosen color was a theological statement. In the murals that once adorned palace walls, now faded to ghosts of their former brilliance, we see a recurring pantheon of deities. There is no evidence of a single, all-powerful god, but rather a council of powerful beings, each governing a fundamental force of nature. One prominent figure, often depicted with a headdress of flowing water and holding a sheaf of grain, is almost certainly a goddess of the river and fertility, the divine embodiment of the sunken serpent itself. Another, shown with a falcon's head and surrounded by celestial symbols, likely ruled the sun and the heavens. These were not distant, indifferent gods. They were active partners in the survival and prosperity of the people, requiring constant reverence and reciprocity. This relationship was maintained through an elaborate calendar of rituals and ceremonies that unified the entire community in a shared purpose. While we will never hear the hymns they sang, archaeological evidence allows us to reconstruct the sensory experience of their worship. At the Twin Peaks Sanctuary, the acoustics of the main sunken plaza are extraordinary. A whisper spoken from the central altar can be heard clearly at the very top rows of the seating. This was a space designed for public spectacle, for a priestly voice to address hundreds, perhaps thousands of people at once. Excavations here have uncovered large, circular drums made of stretched hide and clay, as well as sistrum's metal rattles, that would have created a rhythmic, hypnotic soundscape. We can imagine the scene under the star-filled sky, the scent of burning incense from rare imported resins, the rhythmic pounding of drums, the swirling movements of dancers whose steps told the stories of the gods, and the communal chanting that would have vibrated through the very stone of the mountain. These were not passive events, they were participatory dramas that reinforced social bonds and reminded everyone of their place within a cosmic order. The most important ceremony likely coincided with the annual flood of the river, a moment of both anticipation and anxiety. A ritual offering, perhaps a beautifully crafted model boat laden with the first fruits of the harvest, would have been cast into the rising waters as a gift to the river goddess, a plea for her continued bounty and a thanksgiving for her past generosity. For the average person, faith was a more intimate, personal affair, a daily practice of seeking protection and favor. This is where we come closest to touching the humanity of these forgotten people, through the small, personal items they carried with them in life and took with them in death. In one of the most poignant excavations in a modest cemetery on the outskirts of Karath El, archaeologists uncovered the grave of a young woman. Around her neck was a simple amulet, a fired clay disc no larger than a coin pierced for a string. On one side was a crude but unmistakable carving of the water and grain goddess, on the other, a single character from their undeciphered script. This was her personal guardian, a wearable prayer for protection, health, or perhaps fertility. In another grave, that of a child, they found a small, hand-shaped bell made of bronze, a Chinese letter meant to ward off evil spirits with its sound. These are not the treasures of kings, they are the humble, powerful relics of personal faith, objects that give us a glimpse into the hopes and fears of ordinary individuals. They tell us that their belief was not just a state-sponsored spectacle but a deeply felt personal comfort, a way to navigate the uncertainties of life, illness, and loss. This spiritual framework was inextricably linked to political power, creating a system where religion legitimized authority and authority enforced religious doctrine. The ruler, or perhaps the ruling council, was almost certainly not just a political leader but also the highest priest or priestess, the chief intermediary between the people and the gods. Their ability to predict the floods based on astronomical observations, or to call for rituals that seemingly ensured a good harvest, would have been proof of their divine mandate to rule. The grand temples were not just places of worship, they were also economic powerhouses controlling vast tracts of land, storing surplus grain, and overseeing the production of luxury goods for ritual use. This fusion of church and state created an incredibly stable and cohesive society for centuries, as everyone from the highest official to the lowest laborer believed they were working towards a common divine purpose. This theological political engine is what mobilized the workforce to build the pyramids and the irrigation canals, all in service to gods who promised prosperity in return. The utter loss of this intricate belief system is perhaps the most profound layer of their silence. When their civilization fragmented, it wasn't just a government that fell or an economy that collapsed, an entire universe of meaning vanished. The names of their gods were forgotten, their hymns fell silent, their rituals were abandoned. The amulets that once offered comfort became meaningless curiosities, and the temples that once thrummed with life and music became empty shells. This is more than historical loss, it is a cultural and spiritual erasure. We can measure the width of their irrigation canals and weigh their silver ingots, but we can never fully recover the awe they felt watching the solstice sunrise from the Twin Peaks, or the comfort a mother felt placing a clay amulet around her child's neck. Understanding this dimension forces us to confront the true cost of their disappearance. It wasn't just a society that ended, it was a unique way of seeing the world, a particular conversation between humanity and the divine that was silenced forever. Their abandoned temples stand as monuments not only to their architectural genius but to the ghost of a faith that once made the universe make sense. Moving from the grand temples and cosmic beliefs, we arrive at the true heart of the Shadow Empire, its people. To understand how this society functioned for centuries, we must step out of the ceremonial plazas and into their homes to see the intricate social fabric that organized everything from the highest priest to the youngest child. This was not a flat society of equals, but a finely tuned hierarchy, a pyramid of roles and responsibilities that was remarkably stable for generations. At the very apex sat a small, powerful elite, based on the sheer scale of the palaces and their proximity to the grandest temples. This ruling class was almost certainly a fusion of political and religious authority. These were not just kings and queens, they were living intermediaries to the gods, high priests who could read the stars and predict the floods, their divine mandate confirmed by the prosperity they seemingly delivered. Their power was absolute, but it was also deeply connected to their perceived responsibility for the community's well-being. Their lavish tombs, though few have been found unlooted, contain not just gold and lapis lazuli, but also intricately carved stone tablets believed to be legal codes, suggesting their role as the ultimate lawmakers and judges. Just beneath this pinnacle was a crucial and surprisingly large class of administrators, scribes, and master artisans. These were the engineers, the accountants, and the artists who translated the will of the elite into reality. We can see their importance in the very layout of their cities. In Karath El, a distinct neighborhood of spacious, well-built houses sits between the grand civic buildings and the more modest residential quarters. These homes feature private courtyards, dedicated workspace with better lighting, and crucially, small libraries. In one such house, archaeologists found a collection of clay tablets, not epic poetry, but tax records, inventory lists for temple workshops, and architectural calculations for a new canal. This was the empire's middle management, the literate class that kept the intricate machine of state and economy running smoothly. Their status was earned not by birth, but by skill and knowledge, a testament to a society that valued expertise. The foundation of this entire social pyramid, the vast majority of the population, were the farmers, laborers, and common artisans. Their lives were spent working the fields that fed the empire, hauling the stones for its monuments, and weaving the textiles that clothed its people. Evidence from their housing tells a story of modest but dignified living. Their homes, clustered in tight-knit neighborhoods, were small, single-story structures made of mud brick, but they were far from slums. They were clean, organized, and often included a small workshop area for a family trade, like pottery or weaving. The most telling detail comes from the analysis of their garbage heaps. The diet of these commoners, as revealed by animal bones and plant remains, was surprisingly good. A robust mix of grains, vegetables, legumes, and a regular supply of fish from the river, with meat from domesticated goats or sheep likely reserved for special occasions. This suggests that the agricultural surplus was distributed well enough to prevent widespread malnutrition, a key factor in maintaining social stability. The roles of women and children within this structure are revealed through more intimate finds. The discovery of a set of miniature, finely made tools, a tiny bronze chisel, a small hammer, a delicate saw, in the corner of a master carpenter's workshop speaks volumes. This was likely an apprenticeship set, a father's gift to a son he was training in the family trade, showing that skills and social roles were often hereditary. For women, the evidence is more varied. Their burial goods often include items related to textile production, like ornate spindle whorls and weaving kits, indicating this was a highly valued and common female occupation. However, some graves of high-status women contain items that suggest a much broader role. One particularly rich burial, once thought to be a queen, included not only jewelry but also a distinctive seal and a stylus for writing. This has led some scholars to argue that women could, in certain circumstances, hold significant administrative or even religious authority, perhaps as priestesses who managed temple estates or oversaw certain rituals. Leisure and family life, though harder to trace, emerge from the fragments left behind. In the corner of one small home, excavators found a collection of polished river stones and a simple board game carved into a flat piece of limestone. Its rules forever lost but its purpose clear: entertainment and family bonding. Another heartbreakingly human discovery was a small, fired clay figurine of a four-legged animal, perhaps a sheep or a dog, found in the ruins of a home that had been destroyed by fire. Its surface was worn smooth by the touch of small hands, a beloved toy that a child clung to. These objects pull back the curtain on their daily humanity. They remind us that after a long day in the fields or at the loom, people sat together, they played games, they comforted their children, they experienced joy, boredom, and love. This intricate social contract, this web of mutual obligation and shared belief, was the true glue that held the empire together for so long. But how fragile was this cohesion? What happened when the system began to fail? We can speculate that the first cracks might have appeared not at the top or the bottom, but in that vital middle layer. When a prolonged drought reduced the harvest, the tax records those scribes had to compile would have shown a terrifying decline. When trade routes were cut, the master artisans would have been idled, their workshops silent for lack of materials. The administrators, the very people who understood the system's mechanics best, would have been the first to see the looming catastrophe. Their faith in the divine rulers would have been severely tested when the prayers for rain went unanswered and the granaries began to empty. The social bargain that the people would labor and the elite would ensure prosperity would have broken down. The finely tuned hierarchy that had provided order and meaning could have rapidly transformed into a source of resentment and conflict, turning neighbors against each other and families inward, fragmenting a once unified people into desperate, competing groups just trying to survive. This intimate look at their daily lives makes their ultimate silence not just a historical event, but a profound human tragedy. It reminds us that empires are not abstract entities. They are collections of individual stories, of hopes, skills, and relationships that, when placed under unbearable pressure, can dissolve into the quiet dust of time. Their architectural and social achievements were undeniably impressive, but it was their mastery of materials and processes, their technological genius, that truly powered the empire's longevity and set them apart as visionaries. This was a culture that didn't just use the resources around them, they transformed them, pushing the boundaries of what was thought possible in the ancient world and creating tools and systems that would not be seen again for millennia. One of their most stunning breakthroughs was in metallurgy. While their contemporaries were crafting simple copper tools, their smiths had unlocked the secret of creating a unique bronze alloy of exceptional hardness and durability. The recipe was a closely guarded state secret, involving not just the standard copper and tin, but also a precise, small addition of a rare metallic element, likely arsenic or a specific type of zinc ore, which gave the finished product a distinctive golden sheen and a resistance to corrosion that puzzled archaeologists for decades. This wasn't just for show. Weapons made from this alloy held a sharper edge longer, and tools made from it could carve the hardest stones for their monuments with less frequent sharpening, giving them a significant advantage in both construction and, if needed, defense. Perhaps their most impactful innovation, however, was born from the very land that sustained them: water management. Their irrigation systems were engineering marvels, but they went far beyond simple canals. Archaeologists working at a site near the ancient riverbank made a breathtaking discovery: the remains of a massive mechanical water lifting device. Using a series of clay pots fastened to a giant, rotating wheel powered by the current of the river itself, this device could lift thousands of gallons of water a day from the main channel and deposit it into a primary canal that was elevated above the floodplain. This meant that even when the river was at its lowest, they could still irrigate the high fields, effectively defeating the seasonal drought cycle that constrained other agricultural societies. The design principles of this machine, a precursor to the much later Noria wheels of the Islamic Golden Age, reveal a profound understanding of hydraulics and mechanical advantage. It was an invention that turned their environment from an unpredictable master into a manageable resource, guaranteeing food security and freeing up a massive labor force for other pursuits. The economic and social stability this single technology provided cannot be overstated. It was the bedrock upon which their entire civilization was built. Communication across their vast and organized empire required its own form of innovation, and here too, they demonstrated remarkable creativity. While their written script remains undeciphered, evidence points to a system for rapid, long-distance messaging that rivaled the Roman cursus publicus. Along the main overland trade routes, excavators have found the foundations of small, strategically placed stone towers at intervals of approximately 1 day's walk. Initially thought to be watchtowers or small forts, a re-examination revealed that each had a clear line of sight to the next and contained remnants of polished bronze plates and a central hearth pit. The theory, championed by historian Dr. Ilya Petrov, is that these were signal stations. By day, they could use the polished bronze to flash coded messages using sunlight, similar to a heliograph. By night, they could use a coded sequence of fires in the hearth, Petrov explains. It was a simple but brilliantly effective optical telegraph system. A message about a broken trade agreement or a potential invasion could travel from the farthest frontier to the capital in a matter of days, not weeks. This gave the central administration an incredible strategic advantage, allowing them to respond to crises with a speed that would have seemed magical to their neighbors. The story of these technologies is also a story of loss, a haunting reminder that progress is not always linear. The question of why such advanced knowledge faded away is a complex one. For some technologies, like their unique bronze alloy, the answer might lie in resource depletion. The specific ore needed for that special additive may have come from a single, easily exhausted mine. When that source ran out, the knowledge of how to achieve that specific recipe would have become useless and within a generation or two forgotten. For other systems, like the signal towers or the water wheels, their maintenance required a strong, centralized authority with the resources to man them and keep the routes clear. As the empire's cohesion fractured under environmental and economic pressure, this centralized control vanished. The towers were abandoned, the water wheels silted up and crumbled, and the specialized knowledge of how to build and operate them died with the last generation of engineers who knew their secrets. Their technological prowess was a double-edged sword. It created a society of incredible sophistication, but one that was also deeply dependent on that very complexity. When the system broke, there was no simple fallback. The simpler, more robust technologies of their less advanced neighbors outlasted their own brilliant but fragile inventions. This paradox is what makes their technological legacy so poignant. We find their ghost not in grand declarations of war, but in the silent, rusted scraps of a superior metal alloy in a forgotten workshop. We see their genius reflected in the precise mathematical calculations scratched onto a clay tablet, detailing the angle for a water channel. These fragments are a testament to a human creativity that burned brightly against the darkness of antiquity. They show us that innovation can elevate a society to breathtaking heights, but it also creates dependencies and vulnerabilities. Their story is a powerful lesson from the past, reminding us that our own technological marvels, for all their power, are part of a delicate ecosystem, one that requires constant care, adaptation, and a humble recognition that no achievement, no matter how brilliant, is ever truly permanent against the relentless and silencing passage of time. If technology and economy were the empire's muscle and bone, then its art was its beating heart and dreaming mind, a vibrant, expressive force that gave shape to its deepest fears, highest hopes, and most profound beliefs. To walk through a museum displaying their artifacts is to be immediately struck by a unique and powerful aesthetic. This was not art created merely to please the eye. It was a visual language, a system of meaning where every curve, color, and material was charged with intention. Their style is instantly recognizable, a captivating blend of naturalistic detail and stark, almost geometric abstraction. Animals are rendered with breathtaking accuracy, their muscles taut, their expressions alive, yet they are often intertwined with patterns of perfect spirals, zigzags, and checkerboards that seem to represent cosmic order or elemental forces. This marriage of the real and the symbolic creates a tension that feels both ancient and strangely modern, a visual echo of a people trying to capture the world they saw and the world they felt in their souls. The materials they used were chosen with a reverence that bordered on the sacred, each substance carrying its own story and significance. While they worked skillfully with wood, clay, and bronze, their most prestigious works were reserved for stones of immense symbolic weight. Lapis lazuli, that brilliant blue stone flecked with gold pyrite, was the most prized of all. Sourced from a single remote mountain range over 1,000 miles away, its journey to the workshops of the Heartland was an epic tale in itself. They believed its color mirrored the vault of the night sky, making it the perfect material for depicting deities, for inlaying the eyes of statues to give them a lifelike, divine spark, and for crafting the ritual objects used in their most important ceremonies. Another favorite was obsidian, a volcanic glass that could be knapped to an edge finer than any modern surgical steel. This made it practical for precise carving tools, but its glossy, black, reflective surface also gave it a mystical quality. Small, intricately carved obsidian mirrors have been found in high-status graves, perhaps used by priests for scrying or rituals, their surfaces intended to reflect not just a face, but the unseen world beyond. A perfect example of their artistic genius, and one of the most celebrated artifacts ever recovered, is the sculpture known today as the Priestess of the Waters. Carved from a single block of deep green serpentine stone, the figure sits in a posture of serene authority, her hands resting on her knees. She is not depicted as a youthful ideal of beauty, but as a mature woman of evident wisdom and power, with lines of experience around her eyes and a calm, knowing expression. Her headdress is an elaborate masterpiece in itself, featuring delicately carved symbols of flowing water and sprouting grain. But the true marvel lies in the details that only reveal themselves upon closer inspection. The folds of her robe are not just indicated by simple lines. They are covered in a microscopic, finely incised pattern of interconnected fish and river reeds, an entire ecosystem woven into the fabric of her garment. This wasn't meant to be seen clearly from a distance. It was a hidden message, a layer of meaning intended for the gods or for the initiate who drew near. The statue is more than a portrait. It is a theological argument in stone, a declaration that the divine is present in the intricate, interconnected details of the natural world. Their two-dimensional art offers another breathtaking window into their world, particularly the murals that once adorned the walls of their palaces and temples. In one miraculously preserved chamber in a minor noble's villa, archaeologists uncovered a fresco that has come to be called the Garden of Abundance. It depicts a lush, dreamlike paradise filled with impossibly large, ripe fruit trees, flowers of every color, and a menagerie of animals living peacefully together. A leopard lounges peacefully beside a herd of deer, and birds of every hue perch on branches heavy with pomegranates and dates. The style is not concerned with perspective as we know it. Instead, it uses a flat, layered composition where every element is given equal importance, creating a sense of overflowing, chaotic fertility. This wasn't a depiction of a real garden. It was a vision of a mythological golden age, a divine promise of prosperity, or perhaps a map of the afterlife they hoped to attain. The vibrancy of the colors, achieved with mineral pigments mixed with plant gums and applied to wet plaster, has survived millennia with a stunning intensity that still feels alive. Beyond the grand themes of religion and power, their art also speaks to a keen sense of observation and a love for the mundane details of life. The humble pottery used in everyday households, while functional, is often decorated with a charming whimsy. One common water jug, found in dozens of homes, features a simple but beautifully painted frieze of dancing figures holding hands, their joyful movement encircling the entire vessel. Another set of children's bowls has small, molded animal heads forming the handles, turning each meal into a playful event. This democratization of beauty is profoundly telling. It suggests that aesthetics were not reserved for the elite alone, that even in the most ordinary objects, there was a desire to infuse daily life with grace, pattern, and a sense of community. The dancing figures on the jug are a silent echo of a people who found reasons to celebrate, to come together, and to mark the simple act of sharing water with a small touch of art. What does the silent, scattered gallery of their art tell us about the soul of this civilization? It reveals a people deeply connected to the natural world, seeing the divine not in a distant heaven but in the flow of a river, the growth of a plant, and the spirit of an animal. It shows a society that valued both order and abundance, symbolized by the constant interplay of strict geometric patterns and wild, organic forms. Their art was a tool for understanding the cosmos, a weapon for warding off chaos, and a language for expressing hopes that were too complex for words. The utter loss of this artistic tradition is what makes their silence so deafening. We have their granaries, so we know they could feed themselves. We have their drains, so we know they valued cleanliness. But only through their art do we feel their joy, their awe, and their yearning for meaning. Each recovered statue, each fragment of a painted wall, is a rescue mission against oblivion. They are not just artifacts, they are frozen pieces of a collective human consciousness, a unique way of seeing and being that was extinguished forever. Their beauty is a reminder that when a culture dies, we don't just lose its history, we lose a unique answer to the eternal question of what it means to be human. This incredible artistic and technological flourishing did not happen in a vacuum. It was all made possible by a stable and generous environment. But what if that very foundation began to crumble? To understand the forces that may have led to the empire's silence, we must turn from the artifacts they left behind to the very earth itself, listening to a different kind of archive, one written in soil, pollen, and ice. This is where the detective work of modern science meets ancient history, where paleoclimatologists and geoarchaeologists act as forensic investigators, piecing together a crime scene thousands of years old. Their tools are not brushes and trowels, but core drills and mass spectrometers, and the story they are uncovering is one of a slow-motion environmental squeeze that may have fatally undermined the entire civilization. The most critical evidence comes from deep below the surface, in the seemingly mundane layers of mud at the bottom of ancient lakes and in the dried-up oxbows of the sunken Serpent River. By drilling down and extracting long, tubular cores of this sediment, scientists can read the history of the region like the rings of a tree. Each layer represents a year of deposition, and trapped within that mud is a treasure trove of environmental data. One of the most telling clues is fossil pollen. Different plants produce distinctively shaped pollen grains, and by counting and identifying these microscopic particles in each layer, researchers can chart precisely how the local vegetation changed over centuries. The core taken from Lake Tiris, which was once a vast freshwater body near the Heartland, tells a devastating story. For layers corresponding to the empire's golden age, the pollen is dominated by grains from domesticated crops like wheat and barley, and from the trees that flourished in their well-watered orchards like date palms and olives. Then, gradually, a shift occurs. The crop pollen begins to decline. It is replaced first by pollen from drought-resistant shrubs and weeds, and then, in the uppermost layers, by the telltale pollen of hardy desert grasses and ultimately by sand. This is not the signal of a sudden catastrophe, but of a creeping, inexorable aridification, a drying out of the land that would have made agriculture increasingly difficult and ultimately impossible. This biological evidence is corroborated by geochemical analysis of those same soil cores. Using a technique called stable isotope analysis, scientists can measure the specific chemical signatures of oxygen and carbon atoms locked in the sediment. The ratio of these isotopes acts as an ancient rain gauge and thermometer. A shift towards heavier oxygen isotopes, for example, indicates a period of increased evaporation, a sign of hotter, drier conditions. The data from multiple cores across the region all point to the same conclusion. Starting around the time the empire's influence began to wane, the region experienced a multi-century megadrought, punctuated by occasional extreme, flood-level rainfall events. This climatic whiplash would have been even more destructive than a simple, steady drying. The empire's sophisticated irrigation systems were engineered for predictability, for a certain range of river flow. They could not cope with years of pitifully low water followed by a single, catastrophic flood that would have torn through their canals, drowned their fields, and washed away the precious topsoil. The search for answers extends beyond the local mud and into the global climate system, to the ice sheets of Greenland and Antarctica. Paleoclimatologists drill deep ice cores there because the compacted snow of each year traps tiny bubbles of the ancient atmosphere, along with dust and chemicals that were circulating the globe at that time. By analyzing these cores, they can create a timeline of worldwide climate events. And sure enough, the ice core records show a significant climatic anomaly occurring right in the window of the empire's decline. The evidence points to a prolonged period of altered atmospheric circulation patterns that would have pushed the monsoon rains that fed the headwaters of their river further south, starving their heartland of its lifeblood. This suggests that their fate was not just a local tragedy, but was linked to a larger, global shift in climate, making them victims of a changing world they could not possibly have comprehended. A powerful case study that brings this environmental collapse into sharp, human focus is the excavation of a farming village on the empire's arid western fringe, a site now known as Oasis 42. For generations, this community thrived, growing barley in fields nourished by a delicate network of canals fed from a now-vanished spring. The archaeological record shows a sudden, final chapter. In one home, archaeologists found the skeletal remains of a family huddled together in a corner, with no signs of trauma. Outside, the grinding stones were found still sitting on the floor, with a handful of grain beside them, as if someone was interrupted in the middle of preparing a meal. Most tellingly, a layer of fine, wind-blown sand directly covers the final occupation layer, with no evidence of rebuilding or reoccupation. This was not a village destroyed by war, it was a place suffocated. The spring that gave it life likely failed, the fields were buried by the advancing dunes, and the people simply had to leave or perish. Oasis 42 is a microcosm of the larger crisis. It shows the human face of the environmental date, the moment when a way of life that had been sustainable for centuries was abruptly terminated by the relentless advance of a drying world. This scientific narrative paints a picture of a civilization caught in an inescapable trap. Their entire society, its immense population, its centralized economy, its complex social structure, was built upon the premise of a stable and abundant climate. When that climate became unpredictable and then outright hostile, the foundations cracked. A series of drought-induced harvest failures would have emptied the state granaries, eroding the authority of the rulers who could no longer guarantee prosperity. The economic collapse of the luxury goods trade would have followed, as the energy of the society turned inward toward mere survival. The environmental stress likely exacerbated social unrest and may have sparked conflicts over dwindling resources. The great cities, dependent on food imports from the collapsing countryside, would have been the last to fall, but fall they did. Their magnificent irrigation systems silted up, their towering temples were slowly buried by the desert sands, and the knowledge that built them was scattered and lost. The environment that had nurtured this brilliant culture for 1,000 years ultimately became its silent, efficient, and utterly indifferent executioner. Their mastery of the environment and their own internal economy was only half the story, for the Shadow Empire was not an isolated wonder but a central hub in a vast and buzzing network of global exchange. To truly appreciate their reach, we must shift our gaze from the Heartland and out onto the open trails and sea lanes that connected them to a world they knew only through the objects that arrived at their bustling ports and caravanserais. This was a civilization deeply engaged with the unknown, its prosperity fueled as much by long-distance trade as by its own fertile fields. The most tangible evidence of this web of connection lies in the objects themselves, the physical artifacts that made incredible journeys across continents. In a merchant's home in Kareth El, archaeologists uncovered a small, exquisitely carved ivory figurine of an elephant. This was a shocking find, as elephants had been extinct in the region for millennia. The style was unmistakably from a culture based in the distant river valleys of the south, over 1,000 miles away. This was no crude imitation. It was the real thing, a luxury item that had passed through countless hands, its value increasing with every mile it traveled from its origin. It was a testament to the desire for the exotic, a status symbol that spoke of a merchant's success and a household's connection to a wider, more mysterious world. The routes these goods traveled were marvels of logistics and daring. Overland, the most critical artery was the Northern Tin Road, a treacherous path that wound through high mountain passes. Donkey caravans, sometimes hundreds of animals long, would make the months-long journey from the highland mines, bringing back the essential tin needed to alloy with copper to produce bronze. These were not simple paths. They were engineered routes with way stations, maintained bridges over gorges, and even small guard posts to protect the valuable shipments. The merchants who operated these caravans were the empire's lifeline to critical resources, and their safe passage was a matter of state security. By sea, the story was even more dramatic. Using sturdy, reed-built ships capable of riding the monsoon winds, their mariners sailed south along the coast. At a port city now known as Pearl Cove, excavations have uncovered docks, warehouses, and a startling variety of imported goods: fragrant resins from southern forests, ivory, exotic animal skins, and most tellingly, pottery styles from at least 3 different, distinct cultures further down the coast. This was not just direct trade, it was part of a complex multi-hop network where their goods were exchanged and re-exchanged, spreading their influence far beyond their direct contact. This constant flow of goods was accompanied by a less tangible but even more powerful flow: the exchange of ideas and technologies. Their unique bronze alloy, so prized at home, became a desired commodity abroad. But it wasn't just the finished product that was traded. The knowledge of how to make it began to seep out. In the ruins of a smith's workshop in a highland city far to the north, archaeologists found crucibles with slag residues that chemically match the UNIQUE Chinese letter of the Shadow Empire's bronze. This wasn't an imported ingot. This was local production using a borrowed, superior technology. The Highlanders had either reverse-engineered the alloy from acquired goods or, more likely, had learned the secret through contact and exchange with the Empire's own smiths. This technological diffusion worked both ways. The distinctive spiral motifs that appear in the Empire's later artwork bear a striking resemblance to designs found in the pottery of those distant southern cultures, suggesting a cross-pollination of artistic ideas. Their culture was not a static, isolated entity. It was a living, evolving thing that absorbed and adapted influences from every corner of its known world. Politically, these trade relationships were far more than simple business transactions. They were a form of foreign policy and diplomacy. The discovery of a sealed clay tablet in the archives of Kareth-El, stamped with the seal of a foreign king and written in a mix of the Empire's script and a yet undeciphered foreign one, points to formal trade agreements. This was likely a treaty guaranteeing safe passage for merchants, setting tariff rates, and establishing protocols for dispute resolution. These agreements would have been brokered by envoys and ambassadors, creating a fragile web of mutual interest that helped maintain peace and stability across the region. The Empire's power was projected not just through the might of its armies, but through the allure of its goods and the reliability of its word. A merchant from a distant land knew that if he could make the perilous journey to the gates of Kareth-El, he would find a stable market, a fair price, and the protection of a powerful state. This reputation for fairness and order was one of their greatest strategic assets. Yet, for all its strength, this entire global network was terrifyingly fragile. Its existence depended on a chain of conditions that, if broken, could collapse the entire system. The ice core data and soil samples that revealed the megadrought in the Heartland also show a period of increased instability in the mountainous regions to the north. This climatic stress likely pushed nomadic tribes from the arid steppes into the settled lands, disrupting the carefully maintained tin road. A single powerful new chieftain could have arisen, blockading the passes and demanding exorbitant tariffs, or cutting off the flow of tin entirely. Similarly, a shift in political power or an outbreak of piracy along the southern coast could have severed the sea lanes. The Empire, so brilliantly connected, was also exquisitely vulnerable to events happening 1,000 miles beyond its borders, events over which it had no control. The most poignant symbol of this rupture was found not in a grand palace, but in a modest merchant's home in a city on the empire's periphery. The home was abandoned in a hurry, its contents left in place. On the floor of the main room, beside a set of broken scales, archaeologists found a small leather pouch. Inside was not gold or jewels, but a collection of foreign coins from 5 different cultures. These were the samples of a working merchant, his reference kit for evaluating currency from across the known world. The fact that he left it behind suggests his trade had suddenly become worthless. The routes were closed, the connections were severed, the value of those coins evaporated overnight. This small, personal tragedy is a microcosm of the empire's end. The silence that eventually fell over their cities was not just an internal quiet. It was the sound of a world going offline, of conversations ending, of a once vibrant network of human connection falling apart thread by thread. Their fate is a powerful lesson in interdependence, reminding us that a civilization's greatness is often built on bridges, and that when those bridges fall, the isolation that follows can be the quietest and most final of all endings. So we arrive at the central, haunting question that has consumed scholars for generations. How does an empire of such brilliance, with its trade networks spanning continents and its cities engineered for eternity, simply vanish into the silent pages of history? The evidence of their end is everywhere in the archaeological record: the abandoned cities slowly consumed by sand, the workshops left silent, the irrigation canals choked with silt. But the cause of that end remains one of history's most compelling cold cases, a puzzle with multiple suspects and no clear verdict. The leading theories form a spectrum of catastrophes, each supported by tantalizing clues and fervent academic debate, painting a picture of a civilization potentially brought down by a perfect storm of internal and external pressures. One of the most dramatic and long-held theories is that of a violent, catastrophic invasion. Proponents of this idea point to several key sites where the archaeological layer corresponding to the empire's final days shows unmistakable signs of destruction. At the frontier city now called Sentinel's End, excavators found a layer of ash and burned debris covering the entire settlement. More tellingly, they uncovered a mass grave just outside the main gate, containing the skeletons of dozens of young men, many with arrowheads embedded in their bones and severe trauma to their skulls from blunt weapons. The bodies were thrown in haphazardly, with no signs of the careful burial rites the culture was known for. This grim discovery suggests the city fell suddenly to a ruthless assault. But who were the attackers? No new cultural artifacts appear in the layer immediately after the destruction, no distinct pottery styles, no new architectural forms, which argues against a sustained occupation by a foreign power. This has led some historians to speculate about raids by nomadic groups from the arid steppes, warriors who would have come for plunder and then retreated, leaving chaos in their wake but no lasting cultural imprint. A more subtle but perhaps more insidious theory focuses on internal collapse. Could the empire have crumbled from within, its social contract torn apart by inequality, rebellion, or a failure of leadership? Evidence for this can be found in the changing architecture of the later periods. In Karath El, the spacious homes of the middle-class administrators were, in the city's final century, subdivided into smaller, cramped living spaces. At the same time, the ruling elite seemed to have retreated behind ever higher walls, fortifying their palaces in a way that suggests they feared their own people more than any external enemy. Archaeologist Dr. Lena Sharma, who has studied this transition, notes, "We see a clear shift from communal infrastructure, like the public granaries and water systems, towards private hoarding. The state granaries were eventually walled off and placed under heavy guard. This isn't the behavior of a government confident in its support. It's the action of a regime under siege from its population, likely due to resource scarcity. This theory suggests a society fracturing along class lines, where a starving populace may have finally turned on the rulers who could no longer provide for them, leading to civil conflict that shattered the empire's unity from the inside out. Then there is the economic argument, which weaves together many of the environmental threads we discussed earlier. This theory posits that the meticulously engineered economy, the very source of their power, became their Achilles heel. The climate data is clear. A prolonged megadrought would have caused consecutive harvest failures. No amount of grain in the state reserves could last forever. As the surplus vanished, the government would have lost its primary tool for paying laborers and soldiers. The intricate long-distance trade networks, dependent on stability and surplus goods for export, would have withered. Historian of ancient economies Dr. Ben Carter explains this domino effect. Imagine the bronze workshops. No tin coming in from the north means no new bronze tools or weapons. That means the artisans are out of work, the soldiers can't maintain their equipment, the farmers can't repair their plows, the state can't collect taxes from failed businesses. It's a negative feedback loop of stunning speed and efficiency. Their economic model was optimized for growth and stability, but it had no resilience, no plan B for a prolonged contraction. This wasn't a single event, but a series of interconnected economic failures that would have made complex urban life simply unsustainable, forcing a gradual abandonment of the cities as people dispersed to the countryside to simply survive. A more biological terror also stalks the ruins, the possibility of pandemic disease. The dense, interconnected urban populations and the vast trade networks that were the empire's strength could have also been its downfall, serving as a superhighway for contagion. While it is notoriously difficult to find direct evidence of epidemics in the archaeological record, bacteria and viruses rarely leave marks on bones. There are suggestive clues. In several cemeteries from the terminal period, archaeologists have noted a sudden change in burial practices. The careful, individual graves are replaced by mass burial pits where bodies were interred quickly and without grave goods, a sign of a society overwhelmed by death and unable to perform its traditional rites. Paleopathologists studying these remains have found evidence of widespread malnutrition and stress, which would have made the population terribly vulnerable to any introduced pathogen. A disease sweeping through a population already weakened by famine and social unrest could have been the final, devastating blow that prevented any recovery. So which theory is correct? The compelling and frustrating answer is that they all likely are, at least in part. The modern consensus among scholars is moving away from a single, silver bullet explanation and towards a model of systemic collapse. The climate change and drought were the trigger, the underlying cause that set this cascade of disasters in motion. The economic collapse and social unrest were the direct results. The increased vulnerability likely invited external raids, and the crowded, starving conditions may have fostered epidemic disease. They didn't fall for one reason. They fell because all of their systems failed at once. The real mystery is not what killed them, but how they managed to survive for as long as they did against such mounting pressures. Their story is a powerful, ancient lesson in the fragility of complexity. It challenges us to look at our own globally interconnected world and ask ourselves an uncomfortable question. Are we, for all our technological might, any more resilient than they were? Or have we simply built a taller, more intricate, and even more fragile house of cards? For centuries, the Shadow Empire was little more than a rumor, a collection of half-remembered legends and a few strange artifacts that turned up in the markets of later cultures. The first real clue that these whispers pointed to a profound truth emerged not from a trained academic, but from the obsession of a 19th-century British Army officer turned adventurer, Colonel Edward Fitzwilliam. A veteran of colonial postings in India, Fitzwilliam became fascinated by local tales of a golden city swallowed by the dunes. Armed with little more than a tattered map bought from a spice merchant and an unshakable conviction, he led a small, ill-fated expedition into the desert in 1872. His journals, found years later beside his desiccated remains, described his final, magnificent discovery: the sight of a massive, wind-scoured stone ziggurat emerging from the sand, its steps leading to nothing but empty sky. He died believing he had found a mirage, but his coordinates eventually led a proper archaeological team to the site decades later. They named it Carith El. Fitzwilliam's tragic quest was the first crack in the seal of silence, a testament to the powerful allure of this lost world and the high price often paid in its pursuit. The true dawn of scientific understanding began in the 1920s with the work of Dr. Aris Thorne, a methodical and brilliant professor who secured funding for the first major excavation at Carith El. Where Fitzwilliam saw romance, Thorne saw a puzzle to be solved with meticulous grids, careful brushing, and detailed ledgers. His team worked for years under the blistering sun, slowly peeling back the desert to reveal not just a single monument, but an entire city. Thorne's greatest contribution was his focus on the ordinary. While others might have raced for a royal tomb, he meticulously excavated entire neighborhoods, mapping houses, workshops, and streets. It was Thorne who first uncovered the sophisticated drainage system, who cataloged the different styles of pottery in the artisan quarter, and who pieced together the grid-like city plan. His work established the fundamental truth that this was not a society of mere barbaric splendor, but one of astonishing civic organization and daily complexity. He gave the Shadow Empire its skeleton, proving it was a real, functioning civilization. The world's attention truly snapped to the empire in 1954 with what is still considered the most spectacular find: the intact royal tomb of the Weaver Queen. Discovered by Thorne's protege, the formidable archaeologist Dr. Lena Sharma, the tomb was hidden beneath the floor of a nondescript administrative building, evading looters for millennia. Sharma's team was actually looking for foundation stones when a worker's pickaxe suddenly broke through into a hollow space. What they found inside was a time capsule of breathtaking wealth and artistry. The central sarcophagus held the remains of a high-status woman, surrounded not by weapons of war, but by the tools of a master weaver: an inlaid loom, spindles of gold thread, and baskets of fabric so finely woven they felt like silk. Her title, Weaver Queen, was deduced from intricate carvings that showed her presiding over temple rituals involving textiles. This discovery was revolutionary. It forced a complete re-evaluation of their power structure, suggesting that authority could be derived from artistic and economic mastery, not just martial prowess or priestly decree. The tomb's contents spoke of a culture that valued creation, trade, and the sacred nature of craft. Perhaps the most frustrating and tantalizing discovery came in 2008 at a site known as the Archive of Whispers. A joint international team using ground-penetrating radar detected a series of anomalous chambers beneath the main temple complex in Carith El. Excavation revealed a hidden room that had been deliberately sealed with rubble and clay. Inside, they found not gold but knowledge: over 2,000 fired clay tablets, stacked neatly on shelves that had long since crumbled to dust. This was the mother lode, a potential library holding everything from administrative records to epic poetry. The excitement was immediately tempered by the grim reality that the script remained and still remains undeciphered. The head of the project, linguist Dr. Ilya Petrov, described the moment as holding a conversation with a ghost who is speaking perfect, eloquent nonsense. The archive is both the greatest key and the greatest lock in the entire mystery. It represents the Empire's own voice, preserved in perfect clarity, yet rendered mute by our inability to understand its language. Every attempt to crack the code, from complex computer algorithms to painstaking manual comparison, has thus far failed, making this incredible find a constant reminder of how close we are, and yet how far. The latest chapter in this archaeological saga is being written not with shovels, but with satellites and lasers. The application of light detection and ranging technology, or LiDAR, has revolutionized the search for the Empire's full extent. By flying a specially equipped aircraft over the dense jungle regions bordering the desert, researchers can effectively see through the canopy and map the ground beneath. The results have been staggering. What was once thought to be a handful of major cities is now revealed to be a vast, interconnected network of settlements, small towns, and feeder roads that stretched for hundreds of miles. A recent LiDAR survey led by Dr. Ben Carter uncovered the lost city of Tarnath, a sprawling metropolitan center previously unknown, complete with its own smaller pyramid complex and a web of canals. This technology is painting a picture of an empire far more populous and administratively complex than anyone had dared imagine. It suggests that the civilization's collapse was even more catastrophic than thought, depopulating a landscape so thoroughly that the forest simply grew back over the ruins, erasing them from human memory until technology provided us with new eyes. Each of these digs, from the tragic romance of Fitzwilliam's quest to the high-tech revelation of LiDAR, represents a different way of listening to the silence. They are voyages not just into the earth, but into time itself, each painstakingly uncovered artifact an echo of a world that thought it would last forever. The archaeologists, with their diverse methods and motivations, are the interpreters of this quietus. They are the ones who carefully reassemble the broken pottery, who map the outlines of forgotten homes, and who stare at cryptic symbols, willing them to give up their secrets. Their work is a testament to human curiosity, a stubborn refusal to let a civilization be completely erased. Every fragment pulled from the sand is a victory against oblivion, a small piece of a massive and magnificent puzzle that we are still, against all odds, trying to solve. While stones and artifacts offer a silent, static testimony, there is another, more fluid form of memory that has trickled down through the centuries, the living river of oral tradition. In the villages and among the nomadic tribes that now inhabit the fringes of the Shadow Empire's former territory, there are stories. Not histories written on clay, but tales told by elders around fires, repeated for generations until the original facts have blurred into myth. These narratives are the fragile, shimmering ghosts of the past, and within their symbolic language, scholars believe, may lie the last echoes of a civilization whose own name is lost to us. Consider the story of the Kingdom of the Stone Weavers, a legend still told by the Karabi people, whose ancestral grazing lands border the Great Desert. Their epic poem, which can take 3 nights to perform in full, tells of a magnificent city built by a people who could weave stone like cloth and command the river to dance. The rulers of this kingdom were not warriors, but wise men and women who wore robes of blue stone, and whose wealth was measured in grain that never ran low. This description is stunningly precise. The weaving of stone perfectly evokes the precise, mortarless masonry of their pyramids, the blue stone, can only be lapis lazuli, the prized material of their elite. And the grain that never ran low is a poetic but accurate memory of the vast, state-controlled granaries that ensured food security. The Karabi legend even describes the kingdom's fall, blaming it on a great dryness that caused the people to quarrel among themselves before they walked into the desert and did not return. This isn't just a story, it's a shockingly accurate folk memory of environmental collapse and civil strife, preserved for over 3,000 years. Hundreds of miles to the south, the fishing communities along the coast tell a different kind of tale, one that hints at the empire's far-reaching trade connections. Their myth speaks of the silent traders, a people from across the sea who arrived on boats with sun sails. These traders were said to be peaceful but never spoke, communicating only through gestures and the exquisite goods they laid out on the beach. Cloth that held the colors of the sunset, mirrors that showed a man his soul, and knives of black glass that never went dull. In exchange, they took only fresh water and rare spices. The archaeological evidence gives this myth incredible weight. We know the empire had a coastal fleet. The cloth that held the sunset matches the brilliant dyed textiles found in workshops. The mirrors and knives of black glass are perfect descriptions of their ritual obsidian objects. The story paints a picture not of conquest, but of a sophisticated, almost ritualized form of silent barter, a cultural memory of an economic relationship so stable and respectful it became mythologized. The role of these oral traditions is not to provide a perfect factual record, but to act as a cultural vessel, carrying the emotional and thematic truth of events long after the details have faded. Oral history is a process of distillation. Specific names, dates, and places are often the first things to be lost, replaced by archetypes and symbolic actions that hold a deeper meaning for the community telling the story. A historical king becomes a sun king. A devastating drought becomes a punishment from an angry river god. A trade mission becomes a visit from silent spirits. The facts are filtered through the lens of cultural values and the need to make a story memorable and meaningful for each new generation. This is why these myths are so precious and so frustrating. They are not history books, but they are not lies. They are the echo of a real event shaped by the canyon of time through which it has passed. The most poignant validation of this comes from a project that directly collaborated with the elders of the hill folk communities. Linguists and anthropologists recorded their stories of a great flood that was not water but sand, which buried a valley of plenty. The elders spoke of a specific taboo area, a place of ghosts that was to be avoided. Using GPS coordinates derived from the descriptions in these oral accounts, archaeologists were led to a previously unknown valley. There, beneath a relatively recent layer of sand, they found the remains of a modest farming village, a satellite of the great empire that had been abandoned in a hurry and perfectly preserved by the very desert that had consumed it. The oral tradition had preserved not just a story, but a literal map to a forgotten place, a perfect example of how myth and reality can be intimately intertwined. These whispered tales are our most human connection to the Shadow Empire. The stones tell us what they built, the bones tell us how they died, but the stories hint at how they were remembered. They are a testament to the profound impact this civilization had on its neighbors, an impact so deep that the memory of it became woven into the very identity of other cultures. The persistence of these myths is a powerful argument against total erasure. It proves that while an empire can be forgotten, its influence can linger in the shared stories of those who came after, a subtle but undeniable thread in the tapestry of human history. In the end, these oral traditions are a form of resistance against the silence of time. a defiant, whispered declaration that even the greatest of shadows cannot completely erase the light of a story well told. To truly grasp the magnitude of our shadow empire's disappearance, we must widen our lens and place it within a grander, more haunting gallery of human history. It was not alone in its fate. Across the globe and throughout time, other magnificent civilizations have also faced the abyss of oblivion, their voices fading into a chorus of silence. By comparing their stories, we begin to see not just a single tragedy, but recurring patterns, a somber rhythm to the rise and fall of human ambition. This comparative analysis is our best tool for moving beyond mere speculation and toward a deeper understanding of the forces that shape civilizational destiny. Consider the Maya, the legendary masters of the Mesoamerican jungles. Their story resonates with eerie parallels to our shadow empire. Both cultures achieved a stunning mastery of astronomy and mathematics, erecting pyramids that served as both temples and celestial calendars. Both developed complex writing systems that, for the Maya, we can now read, but for our shadow empire remains a locked door. The Maya's decline, much like what we suspect for our lost culture, was likely not a single event but a slow unraveling. Historians point to a combination of intense warfare between rival city-states, severe, prolonged drought that crippled their agricultural base, and a resulting collapse of the faith their people had in their divine rulers. The pattern is hauntingly familiar: environmental pressure exacerbating social and political fractures, leading to a loss of faith in the established order and a gradual abandonment of the great urban centers. The jungle did not conquer the Maya, they retreated from it, leaving their stone cities to be reclaimed by the vines, just as the sands reclaimed Kareth El. Then there is the enigma of the Indus Valley civilization, a contemporary of ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia that thrived in what is now Pakistan and northwest India. Here, the echoes are even stronger. The Indus Valley people, centered on cities like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, were the great planners of the ancient world. Their cities were laid out on precise grids, much like our shadow empires, with sophisticated, standardized drainage and water supply systems that speak of a powerful central authority and a communal ethos. They too engaged in extensive long-distance trade, and they too developed a unique, undeciphered script that continues to defy translation. Their end, around 1900 BC, is also shrouded in mystery, with theories ranging from the shifting course of the Great Indus River due to tectonic activity to a similar climatic shift toward aridity that devastated their farmland. The comparison is profound. It suggests that a specific type of civilization, one built on meticulous urban planning, water management, and complex trade, might be particularly vulnerable to environmental and hydrological disruption. Their greatness was their precision, but when the world became unpredictable, that precision became a fatal liability. Yet, for all these similarities, our shadow empire stands apart in one crucial, defining way: the totality of its silence. We know the names the Maya called themselves. We can read their histories on their stelae. We know the names of their gods Itzamna, Kukulkan, Chok. Similarly, we know what the Indus Valley people looked like from their intricate seals, and we have a strong sense of their social structure. But for our shadow empire, we have nothing, no name, no spoken language, no pantheon of deities we can identify by name. This is what makes it the ultimate historical ghost. Its erasure was so complete that it became a phantom limb on the body of human history, an absence felt more than a presence known. This raises a disturbing question: why are some civilizations remembered while others are so utterly forgotten? The answer often lies in the nature of their interaction with successor cultures. The Maya never truly vanished. their descendants live on, and their knowledge was partially absorbed and recorded by later cultures like the Aztecs. The Romans meticulously documented the cultures they conquered, even as they subsumed them. But our shadow empire seems to have collapsed into a vacuum, with no rising power interested in preserving its story, no neighboring scribes to record its fall. It faded away in isolation, its memory dying with the last person who spoke its language. This broader view is championed by historians who study civilizational cycles, scholars like Dr. Lena Sharma, who argues that we must think in terms of resilience, not just power. The most enduring cultures, she notes, are not necessarily the most technologically advanced or the most artistically brilliant. They are the most adaptable. They are the ones who build redundancy into their systems, who have a diverse economic base, and whose cultural identity is flexible enough to evolve under pressure. The Maya and the Indus Valley people, for all their achievements, were highly specialized. Our shadow empire, with its dependence on a single river and a few key trade routes, was a masterpiece of specialization. And in history, over-specialization is often a prelude to extinction. This perspective transforms our quest from a simple murder mystery into a profound lesson in sustainability. These lost cultures are not failures. They are cautionary tales about the inherent risks of building a society that is too perfect, too finely tuned for a specific set of conditions that will not and cannot last forever. What unique lesson, then, does our shadow empire hold for us? Perhaps it is a lesson about the fragility of memory itself. The Maya left behind texts we can read. The Indus Valley left behind artifacts that speak of a distinct culture, but our shadow empire's greatest legacy is its silence. It is the ultimate example of how a civilization can be incredibly influential, its trade goods found everywhere, its architectural styles copied, its technologies adopted, and yet have its core identity, its name, its voice, completely wiped from the record. It forces us to confront a terrifying possibility, that a society's true end is not the fall of its last city, but the death of its last story. In our own era of digital records and global interconnection, it seems impossible that such a total erasure could happen again. But the story of this empire whispers a warning. It reminds us that all our achievements, all our art and science and history, are held in fragile vessels. It urges us to listen not just for the grand narratives of history, but for the whispers in the void, for the stories that were almost lost, and for the profound lessons taught by those who left behind nothing but shadows. For centuries, the only way to find the footprints of this lost civilization was to walk the earth, to rely on luck, or to follow the fading threads of local legend. But in the last few decades, a revolution has begun, a quiet, technological upheaval that is allowing us to see through time itself, to peel back the layers of sand and soil without ever lifting a shovel. We are no longer just archaeologists. We have become time travelers armed with satellites, lasers, and the very building blocks of life, and we are finally starting to listen to the whispers this empire left behind. One of the most powerful new eyes in the sky is light detection and ranging, or LiDAR. Imagine being able to strip an entire forest or a desert plain of its vegetation and surface debris with the push of a button, revealing the ghostly imprint of every wall, road, and foundation hidden beneath. That is precisely what LiDAR does. Mounted on an aircraft, it fires millions of laser pulses at the ground, measuring the precise time it takes for each pulse to bounce back. By filtering out the returns from trees and brush, computers can create a stunningly detailed, three-dimensional map of the bare earth. The impact on our understanding has been nothing short of seismic. A recent survey led by Dr. Ben Carter focused on a region previously thought to be a sparsely populated frontier zone. The LIDAR data revealed the opposite, a sprawling, interconnected network of towns, feeder roads, and even sophisticated agricultural terracing, proving the empire's reach and administrative control was far greater than any historian had ever dared to propose. It was like turning on a light in a dark room and realizing the room was 10 times larger than you thought and filled with intricate furniture you never knew was there. While LIDAR maps the macro scale of the empire, another suite of tools allows us to zoom into the most intimate level imaginable, the genetic code of its people. The field of paleogenetics has exploded, granting us the once unthinkable ability to extract and analyze ancient DNA from skeletal remains thousands of years old. The process is incredibly delicate, often conducted in sterile, positive pressure labs to prevent contamination from modern DNA, but the results are rewriting history. By sequencing genomes from burials across the empire's territory, researchers are tracing patterns of migration and kinship that written records could never reveal. One landmark study analyzed remains from a cemetery in Karath El and compared them to samples from a distant coastal trading post. The genetic links were undeniable, showing not just trade in goods, but the movement of people families relocating, marriages between communities hundreds of miles apart, creating a biological tapestry of connection that confirms the empire was a truly unified and mobile culture, not just a collection of isolated city-states paying tribute to a distant capital. This genetic detective work goes beyond genealogy to reveal startling details about their daily lives and health. Analysis of dental plaque from skeletons has identified ancient strains of bacteria, giving us a window into their diet and even diseases. In one poignant case, scientists found genetic evidence of a parasite in the remains of a child, a waterborne organism that causes a debilitating illness. This single data point, this microscopic ghost, tells a heartbreaking story of suffering, but it also confirms the historical evidence of their advanced water systems. The parasite thrives in stagnant water, suggesting that even with their engineering genius, maintaining perfect sanitation in a massive city was an endless battle. This is the power of modern technology. It turns an anonymous skeleton back into a human being with a story. The excitement pulsing through the academic community is palpable. Dr. Ilya Petrov, the linguist struggling with the undeciphered script, describes it as a new golden age of discovery. For my entire career, he says, we have been trying to read a book with 90% of the pages glued shut. Now, technologies like LIDAR are handing us new pages, maps of cities we never knew existed. And DNA analysis is giving us the dramatis personae, the list of characters. We still can't read their lines, but we finally know who was in the play and where the stage was set. It's the most hopeful I have ever been that we will break through. This sentiment is echoed across the field. There is a growing belief that the combined power of these tools will create a critical mass of data, a context so rich that the stubborn script may finally begin to yield its secrets. However, this incredible power to uncover the past comes with a profound responsibility to protect it and the people connected to it. The ethical considerations are now at the forefront of every major project. The ability to find a burial site with satellite imagery means we can also loot it with the same technology. There is a constant, tense race between archaeologists and illicit treasure hunters, making the precise location of new finds a closely guarded secret. More importantly, there is a growing and essential movement toward collaborative archaeology. This means that projects are no longer planned by foreign universities in isolation. They are built in partnership with the local communities and descendant populations who live on this land today. This involves training and hiring local team members, sharing all findings with the community first, and most critically, respecting cultural and spiritual beliefs regarding human remains and sacred sites. The question is no longer just what can we learn, but how should we learn it and who should have a say? The goal is to ensure that in our quest to give voice to a silent empire, we do not silence or disrespect the living cultures that are its inheritors. These technological advancements are more than just new tools. They represent a fundamental shift in our relationship with the past. We are moving from speculation to revelation, from a few scattered puzzle pieces to a clear sense of the entire board. Each laser pulse from a LiDAR rig, each sequenced genome from an ancient tooth, is a point of light piercing a darkness that has persisted for millennia. They promise a future where the Shadow Empire may not be so shadowy after all, where we may not only understand how they lived and why they fell, but perhaps one day even hear the echo of their own names for themselves. This is the new frontier of history, a place where science and the humanities are joining forces to solve the greatest mysteries of our shared human story. The silence that fell over their cities was not an ending but a transformation. While the empire's name may have been erased, its essence did not simply vanish into the ether. Instead, it seeped into the cultural groundwater, flowing unseen into the foundations of the societies that came after. This is the most fascinating paradox of all. A civilization can be so thoroughly forgotten, and yet its ghost can continue to walk the earth, its influence echoing in the art, technology, and even the myths of peoples who would never know its name. Their legacy is not written in stone tablets, but in the subtle, borrowed DNA of human progress. We can trace this ghostly inheritance most clearly in the realm of practical knowledge, particularly their revolutionary approach to water management. Centuries after the great cities were abandoned, in a valley far to the west, a new culture began to flourish. Their earliest irrigation systems were simple ditches, but within a few generations, their engineering underwent a sudden and unexplained leap in sophistication. They began constructing elaborate, subterranean aqueducts that tapped into groundwater, channeling it for miles with a precise, gentle slope that prevented erosion and maximized flow. The design was eerily familiar. It was a near-perfect replication of the Kanat system pioneered by our Shadow Empire, a technology that had seemingly died with them. There was no direct contact, no conquest that could explain this transfer. The most likely explanation is that scattered groups of survivors, refugees from the collapsing Heartland, carried this knowledge with them in their exile. They would have been absorbed into new communities, their skills valued and adopted by local chieftains. Over generations, the origin of the teachers was forgotten, but their life-saving technology lived on, becoming a cornerstone of a new civilization's success. The Empire's greatest invention outlasted its creators, a silent gift to the future. This pattern of technological diffusion repeats itself with their unique bronze alloy. For centuries after the Empire's fall, weapons and tools of a distinctive, golden-hued bronze with exceptional hardness begin to appear in the graves of chieftains and kings across the region. These were prized heirlooms, objects of immense power and status. Chemical analysis reveals their composition is identical to the alloy perfected in the workshops of Kareth El. At first, archaeologists assumed these were looted relics, war trophies from a forgotten age, but some of these artifacts date from periods hundreds of years after the collapse. This suggests that the knowledge of how to create the alloy did not completely die. It is possible that a guild of smiths, protectors of the secret recipe, managed to flee and offer their services to new patrons. The formula would have been a closely guarded secret, a source of power for their new masters. The empire itself was gone, but its signature material technology became the standard for excellence for generations, its origin story fading into legend until only the superior quality of the metal itself told a silent story of a lost source. The artistic spirit of the empire proved equally resilient, though its journey was more subtle, its motifs adapting and evolving as they were adopted by new cultures. The most striking example is the fate of their iconic spiral and maze-like patterns, which held such profound cosmological significance. Centuries later, these same patterns begin to appear on the pottery of a nomadic pastoralist people who moved into the abandoned river valleys. On the original temple frescoes, these spirals represented the cyclical nature of water, time, and life itself. On the nomadic pots, the meaning had shifted. The patterns now adorned ceremonial vessels used in funerary rites, their swirling lines perhaps symbolizing the journey of the soul to an afterlife. The form was preserved, but the meaning was remade to serve a new worldview. Similarly, the figure of the water and grain goddess seems to have undergone a fascinating transformation. In the folklore of the hill tribes that still inhabit the region, there is a recurring tale of a benevolent, nameless Lady of the Springs, a spirit who ensures clean water and protects travelers who leave her small offerings. Her description, while vague, carries echoes of the older deity, a cultural memory so deeply embedded that it survived the complete extinction of the religion it came from, downgrading from a major goddess to a local folk spirit, but persisting nonetheless. Perhaps the most profound question this legacy forces us to ask is what it truly means for a culture to survive. Is it the continuity of a name, a language, a political structure? Or can it be something far more fragmented and yet more enduring? The Shadow Empire challenges our very definition of cultural death. It did not live on as a coherent entity, but it achieved a different kind of immortality through osmosis. Its greatest ideas were too powerful, too useful, too beautiful to be completely lost. They were broken apart like a mosaic, and the individual tiles were picked up and set into new, different pictures by the cultures that followed. A piece of their engineering went here, a fragment of their art went there, a strand of their mythology was woven into a new tapestry. They became a part of the common inheritance of humanity, anonymous donors to the great reservoir of knowledge and culture that all societies draw upon. This is the ultimate testament to their resilience. They built something so fundamental that its components could be stripped of their original context and still retain their value, their power, and their ability to inspire long after the world that created them had turned to dust. Their silence, therefore, is not an emptiness, it is a presence. It is the quiet hum of influence that has never ceased, a proof that even the most total erasure cannot remove the indelible marks a civilization leaves on the long journey of humankind. But to understand how this environmental collapse truly strangled a civilization, we must move beyond the grand narrative of drought and examine its precise, devastating impact on the very engine of their society, agriculture. The empire's entire existence was predicated on the predictable generosity of the sunken Serpent River. Their brilliant irrigation systems were designed for a specific range of conditions. They could handle a slightly low flood or a moderately high one, but they were utterly unprepared for the climatic whiplash the data reveals. A series of drought-stricken years would have lowered the river's volume to a trickle, leaving the intricate network of canals dry and useless. The water-lifting wheels would have sat motionless in the sun-baked mud. Then, in a cruel twist, the next year might bring a catastrophic flood, a deluge of water rushing down from the highlands with such ferocity that it would have torn through their carefully engineered levees and canals, drowning fields, washing away the precious, nutrient-rich topsoil and salinating the land with debris. This cycle of drought and flood wouldn't just reduce the harvest, it would systematically destroy the agricultural infrastructure itself, making recovery impossible. The state granaries, those marvels of economic planning, were designed for short-term shortfalls, not for a complete and permanent breakdown of the system that filled them. Once those reserves were exhausted, the social contract that bound this complex society together evaporated. The evidence for this is written not in clay, but in wood and mud. Paleoclimatologists working with historians have built a stunningly precise timeline of this disaster by studying ancient tree rings from preserved logs found in the ruins. Each ring tells the story of a single year. A wide ring indicates a year of good rain and growth. A narrow ring signifies drought and strain. The tree ring chronology for the region shows a terrifying pattern. A cluster of exceptionally narrow rings indicating severe, multi-year drought, occurring right at the time the archaeological record shows the widespread abandonment of the farmlands on the empire's periphery. This biological archive is corroborated by cores drilled from ocean sediments just off the coast. These cores contain layers of silt washed out from the river mouth over millennia. By analyzing the chemical composition and grain size of this silt, scientists can determine how much water the river was carrying each year. The data shows a dramatic decline in sediment flow during the same period, confirming the drought, followed by a few sharp, violent spikes of immense erosion. The telltale signature of those catastrophic floods scouring the bare, exposed land. This multidisciplinary detective work turns speculation into near certainty. As Dr. Elena Vance, the paleoclimatologist, puts it, we're not just looking at a theory anymore. We're reading the diary of the disaster. The trees and the ocean floor are our witnesses. They testify to a period of environmental chaos that no civilization, no matter how brilliant, could have easily survived. This brings us to the most crucial question: why did they fail to adapt? Their history was one of brilliant innovation, so what prevented them from finding a solution this time? The answer lies in the very nature of their success. They had become victims of their own specialization. Their entire society, its dense urban populations, its centralized economy, its specialized workforce was a magnificent machine perfectly calibrated for a specific climate niche. When that niche changed, the machine broke down. Adaptation requires flexibility, redundancy, and the ability to experiment with entirely new ways of living. But the empire's immense complexity and interconnectedness made it profoundly inflexible. A farmer facing drought might have wanted to switch to a more resilient but less productive crop, but that decision was likely made by a distant administrator relying on centuries-old agricultural models. The centralized state, focused on maintaining control and collecting taxes based on grain, would have resisted such a shift. Their response was likely to try harder with the old methods, to dig the canals deeper, to build the levees higher, doubling down on a strategy that was becoming more obsolete with each passing season. They were trying to fix a broken system with the same tools that built it, unable to envision a fundamentally different way of organizing their society. This story of vulnerability and resilience is not just an ancient history lesson. It holds a stark mirror to our own modern world. We too have built a global civilization of immense complexity and interdependence, one that is highly optimized but also potentially fragile in the face of rapid environmental change. Our own climate is shifting, and the challenge of adapting is not merely a technological one, but a deeply social and political one. The fate of the Shadow Empire reminds us that the greatest obstacle to adaptation is often not a lack of ingenuity, but a failure of imagination and institutional inertia. It asks us whether our own systems are flexible enough to change course when the old ways no longer work, or if we, too, are risking everything by remaining locked into patterns of the past. Their silence is a warning from the depths of time, urging us to listen not just to the data of our own tree rings and ice cores, but to the profound lesson they left behind, that a civilization's greatest strength can, in a changing world, become its most fatal weakness. Of all the mysteries this lost civilization left behind, perhaps the most intimate and the most frustrating is the sound of its voice. We can see their cities, we can touch their tools, we can walk the ghostly outlines of their homes, but we cannot read their words. Their language remains a locked door, and behind it lies everything that would make them truly knowable to us: their names, their poetry, their laws, their jokes, and their fears. This is the great linguistic puzzle, a code that has resisted cracking for over a century, making the Rosetta Stone's decipherment look like a simple crossword by comparison. The script itself is a thing of beauty and maddening complexity. It isn't a simple alphabet of 20 or 30 letters, nor is it a purely pictorial system like early Egyptian hieroglyphs. Instead, it appears to be a mixed script, a sophisticated blend of hundreds of signs. Some are clear logograms, stylized but recognizable pictures of a hand, a star, a fish, or a grain of wheat that represent entire words or concepts. But many more are abstract geometric shapes, zigzags, crosses, loops, and dots whose meanings are utterly inscrutable. These likely represent phonetic sounds, syllables that could be combined to spell out words for more abstract ideas, names, or grammatical endings. This combination made it incredibly efficient for trained scribes, but a nightmare for modern decipherers, as a single inscription can be read on multiple levels, its meaning shifting based on context we no longer possess. The quest to break this code has become a sort of holy grail for linguists and cryptographers, a challenge that has consumed brilliant minds and entire careers. The fundamental problem is the lack of a bilingual text, a single inscription that says the same thing in both the unknown language and a known one. Without this key, scholars are essentially trying to solve a puzzle with no picture on the box and half the pieces missing. They can't even be certain what language family the script represents. Is it an isolate, a tongue with no living relatives, making it even more unique? Or is it an ancient, pristine form of a language that later evolved into something we might recognize? Early efforts relied on painstaking manual comparison, counting the frequency of signs and analyzing their positions in texts. A sign that appears at the beginning of many texts on temple gates might be a word like welcome or holy. A repeating sequence on clay balls used to seal storage jars might mean contents verified. These are educated guesses, tiny footholds on a massive, sheer cliff face. The digital age has ushered in a new era of hope, with computational linguistics offering powerful new tools. Teams now feed high-resolution images of every known inscription into sophisticated algorithms designed to find patterns invisible to the human eye. The software can analyze the statistical likelihood of certain signs appearing together, map the evolution of sign shapes over centuries, and even compare the structural patterns of the script to those of known languages, searching for a hidden grammatical kinship. One recent project, led by a consortium of universities, used a neural network to analyze over 5,000 inscribed artifacts. After months of processing, the AI did identify a handful of recurring sign pairs that likely represent common grammatical constructs, perhaps something like of the, or, and the. It was a minuscule breakthrough, but in this field, even the tiniest flicker of light is cause for celebration. It proved that there is a logical, decipherable structure there, waiting for us to find the right vantage point to see it. The history of this decipherment is filled with stories of near breakthroughs that ultimately led to frustrating dead ends, each one humanizing this decades-long struggle. In the 1980s, a young, brilliant linguist named Anya Sharma became convinced that a series of short inscriptions on ritual pottery depicted a form of numerical notation combined with the names of deities. She spent 3 years building a complex theory, matching sign frequencies to offerings listed in later cultures' myths. For a brief, exhilarating moment, it seemed to work. She could read the captions on a famous vase as 5 offerings to the river goddess. The academic world buzzed with excitement, but her theory collapsed when applied to a larger corpus of texts. The patterns broke down, and what seemed like a coherent system was revealed to be a compelling illusion, a case of scholarly pareidolia where she had seen a face in the clouds. Dr. Sharma, now in her 70s, still works on the problem, her earlier disappointment having forged a tempered, patient resolve. She often says, "We are not just decoding signs, we are trying to eavesdrop on a conversation that ended 3,000 years ago." We have to listen for the meaning behind the silence. This profound struggle forces us to confront a deeper question about identity itself. Language is not merely a tool for communication. It is the architecture of thought, the vessel of culture, and the soul of a people. It shapes how its speakers perceive time, relationship, and their place in the universe. When a language dies, it doesn't just take a dictionary with it. It extinguishes an entire unique way of being human. To lose a language is to lose a world view. We will never hear the lullabies a mother sang to her child in the shadow of the great ziggurat. We will never understand the specific term they might have had for the particular quality of light at dusk on the river, or the complex word that encompassed the combined feeling of community, gratitude, and obligation after a successful harvest. This is the true tragedy of their silence. We have their bones, but we have lost their spirit. We have their buildings, but we cannot hear the conversations that once filled their rooms. Each untranslated word on a clay tablet is a unique thought, a feeling, a piece of a soul that is fading a little more with each passing century, a whisper on the wind that we are desperately, and against all odds, still trying to hear. Amidst the grand narrative of collapse and the silent testimony of ruins, it is the small, personal artifacts that truly bridge the millennia, transforming an academic mystery into a profoundly human story. These objects, left behind not for glory but for life, are the most direct connection we have to the individuals who called this empire home. They are the echoes of everyday existence, and they remind us with heartbreaking clarity that history is not made by abstract forces, but by people who loved, feared, played, and hoped for a future that would never come. One of the most touching discoveries was made in the corner of a modest, single-room home in a Karath El suburb. The building had been destroyed by fire, its walls collapsed inward, sealing a layer of the past like a time capsule. As archaeologists carefully sifted through the debris, they found a small, fired clay figurine of a 4-legged animal, its snout worn smooth and shiny by the constant, affectionate touch of small hands. This was no ritual object, it was a toy. We can easily imagine the child who owned it clutching it for comfort during a storm, or perhaps forgetting it in a corner after a day of play. This simple, crudely shaped piece of clay is a silent testament to the universal language of childhood, a poignant reminder that the city's grand avenues and temples were also backdrop to the simple, intimate dramas of family life. Beyond the objects they held, the people themselves can speak to us through their very bones. The science of bioarchaeology allows us to read the stories written in skeletal remains, offering intimate details that no written record could ever provide. By analyzing isotopes in teeth and bones, scientists can determine where a person grew up and what they ate. Studies of skeletons from the empire's Heartland reveal a population that was generally well-nourished, with a diet rich in grains, fish from the river, and occasional meat. Their teeth show less decay than many ancient cultures, likely due to the lack of sugary fruits and honey in their main diet, but also show extreme wear from grit in their bread, milled by stone grinders. We can see the physical toll of their lives, spines curved from years of hard labor, arthritic joints, and healed fractures from accidents. One older man, buried in the artisan's quarter, had a compressed vertebra and massively overdeveloped shoulder muscles, a permanent physical signature of a lifetime spent as a stone carrier or mason, one of the anonymous thousands who literally carried the weight of the civilization's grandeur on their backs. Perhaps the most emotionally devastating insights come from moments of sudden, shared tragedy. At a site on the Empire's desiccated western frontier, archaeologists uncovered a scene of heart-stopping intimacy. In the main room of a small farmhouse, they found the skeletons of 5 individuals huddled together in a corner: 2 adults, 2 teenagers, and a small child. There were no signs of weapon trauma, no evidence of attack. The position of the bodies suggested they died together, seeking comfort in their final moments. On the floor nearby, a grinding stone sat beside a small pile of grain, as if someone had been preparing a meal when the end came. The most likely explanation is not violence, but a sudden, asphyxiating dust storm or a collapse of the dwelling itself. This family unit, buried together in a final embrace, transforms the abstract concept of collapse into a visceral, personal catastrophe. They are no longer statistics. They are a mother, a father, and their children, whose world ended not in a grand historical event, but in a single, quiet, terrifying moment. Other finds introduce us to individuals of remarkable skill and knowledge. In a small, well-built house near the Temple district, excavators found a collection of artifacts that clearly belonged to a healer or an apothecary. There were finely carved stone mortars and pestles, dozens of small clay pots still containing residues of different substances, and a collection of delicate bronze tools, including probes and spatulas. Chemical analysis of the residues revealed a sophisticated understanding of botany and chemistry. One pot contained ground willow bark, a natural source of salicylic acid, the active ingredient in aspirin. Another held a paste made from a known antiseptic plant, while a third contained a mixture of clays and minerals likely used as a base for pigments or poultices. This was not magic or superstition. This was a practical, evidence-based medical tradition. We can picture this healer at work, diagnosing a fever, grinding herbs for a pain-relieving tea, or setting a broken bone with skill and compassion. The loss of such specialized knowledge, the extinction of this entire school of healing, is a quiet tragedy within the larger silence. Then there are the attempts at communication that never reached their destination, the messages frozen in time. In the ruins of a merchant's archive, a small, baked clay tablet was found, different from the others. It was not an inventory list or a tax record. The inscription, while still undeciphered, was shorter and more carefully carved. It was found beside the remains of a wooden box that had long since decayed, and near the skeleton of a young woman. The style of the script is personal, flowing, unlike the rigid administrative hand on other tablets. Many scholars believe this is a personal letter, perhaps even a love letter. Was it a message from a husband away on a long trading journey, a declaration of affection from a secret admirer? A final farewell from someone who knew they would not return. We will likely never know the specific words, but the object itself carries immense emotional weight. It represents a human impulse that transcends time, the need to reach out, to connect, to express feeling to another person. This tiny tablet is a fossilized moment of human emotion, a whisper of a personal story forever locked in the clay. These intimate glimpses are the most powerful antidote to the Empire's overwhelming silence. They force us to move beyond the scale of empires and droughts and to focus on the individual human experience. That child's toy, that healer's kit, that family's final embrace, they are reminders that this was a world of morning meals and bedtime stories, of skinned knees and cherished possessions, of hard work and small comforts. The civilization did not fail. Millions of individual lives were interrupted, each with their own dreams and struggles. This personal angle is what makes their disappearance so deeply affecting. It is not the fall of a faceless state that we mourn, but the loss of all those unique, irreplaceable human worlds. To remember them is to grant them a measure of the dignity that time so ruthlessly erased, and to acknowledge that our own fleeting lives are part of the same fragile, beautiful, and heartbreaking human story. We have traced their footsteps through grand cities and held the humble toys of their children, but now we must confront the most powerful and puzzling artifact they left behind, not an object but an emptiness. The most defining characteristic of this civilization is its silence, and this silence is not a passive absence. It is an active, shaping force in history. It dictates how we remember, how we investigate, and ultimately how we value the past. The void they left is not merely a blank space on a timeline. It is a canvas upon which we project our questions, our theories, and our deepest curiosities. This emptiness has, paradoxically, become the central character in their story, a presence defined by its absence that forever challenges our understanding of what history truly is. This systematic silencing of a society can happen through several powerful mechanisms, each leaving a distinct fingerprint on the corpse of culture. The most brutal is deliberate erasure by a conqueror. A new power seeking to legitimize its rule may systematically dismantle the monuments of the old, melt down its art for bullion, and outlaw its language and stories, aiming to sever the conquered people from their own past and force them into a new identity. We see this pattern throughout history, from the Romans carting away the gods of defeated nations to the Spanish melting Aztec gold into ingots. Then there is the cataclysm, a volcanic eruption, a rapid climate shift, a pandemic that strikes so swiftly and so utterly that it simply halts a culture in its tracks. There is no time for a managed decline or a transfer of knowledge. The lights go out all at once, and the survivors are too few and too traumatized to preserve the complex whole of their former world. Finally, there is the slow, quiet death by neglect. A civilization can simply fade from relevance, its trade routes bypassed, its ideas becoming unfashionable, its people gradually assimilating into more dynamic neighboring cultures until its unique identity dissolves away like a sugar cube in water. Our shadow empire seems to have suffered a terrifying combination of all three. Environmental cataclysm likely broke its back, internal neglect and fragmentation caused its knowledge to scatter, and its eventual conqueror was not an army, but the relentless, patient sands of the desert, which buried its cities and ensured its name would be forgotten. The impact of this erasure on the historical narrative is profound and deeply distorting. History, as the saying goes, is written by the victors, but it is also overwhelmingly written by the literate, the centralized, and the monument builders. When a culture leaves no decipherable written records, it risks being defined solely by the casual, often dismissive, comments of its rivals or successors. They become a footnote in someone else's story, their complexity reduced to a stereotype: barbarians, mysterious folk, a people of great wealth but little culture. The glorious, nuanced tapestry of their daily lives, their laws, their philosophy, and their inner world is lost, and we are left with only the impression they made on outsiders, which is often a caricature. This creates a historical hierarchy where societies that wrote things down are considered historical, while those that did not are often relegated to prehistory. a distinction that implies a lesser significance, even if their architectural and artistic achievements far surpassed those of their literate contemporaries. Philosophers of history have long grappled with this power of the unspoken. Mitchell Rolfe Truelot, in his seminal work Silencing the Past, argues that silencing is not an accident, it is an active process. He writes that power operates not only by pushing certain narratives forward, but also by strategically creating absences and erasures. The complete silence surrounding our shadow empire is, in this view, a historical fact in itself. It is the result of a process, whether environmental, social, or political, that made their continuation impossible and their memory untenable. This shifts our focus from just lamenting what we don't know to critically examining why we don't know it. The silence becomes a subject of study in its own right, a dark energy that shapes the gravitational field of our understanding. It forces us to ask not only what happened, but also what mechanisms, natural or human, were put in place to ensure that we could never fully know what happened. This metaphysical exploration forces our uncomfortable self-reflection about our own era. What histories are we overlooking today? Whose voices are being systematically silenced, buried under the avalanche of a dominant global culture, or drowned out by the deafening noise of digital information overload? Are we, in our relentless focus on the present, creating the forgotten civilizations of the future? The cultures most at risk may not be in far-off deserts, but in the fragile indigenous communities losing their languages, in the dissenting voices being suppressed by authoritarian states, in the digital formats that are becoming unreadable as technology evolves. We are living in the midst of a great winnowing of memory, and we must learn to listen for the whispers in the void now, before they too are extinguished. We must become archaeologists of the present, carefully preserving not just the loud proclamations of power, but the fragile, everyday stories that truly define a people. Ultimately, the story of this empire teaches us that history is not just composed of the events that were recorded, but equally of the events that were forgotten. The silence is not the outer darkness beyond the edges of the historical map. It is woven into the very fabric of the map itself. It is the negative space that gives form to the positive. Our desperate, passionate quest to understand this shadow civilization is a testament to the human refusal to accept that silence as final. We are, in a way, trying to hear the shape of a room by listening to the echoes that still linger long after the music has stopped. Their silence is a void that pulls at us, a gravitational well of curiosity that challenges us to become better listeners, more humble historians, and more ardent protectors of the countless other stories that risk fading away, reminding us that the greatest mysteries are often not what was said, but what was left unsaid. How does an entire civilization, not just its cities but its very memory, vanish from the world? We've explored the environmental collapses and economic fractures that can topple a society, but there is a final, more subtle death, the death of a story. The silence that engulfed our shadow empire is more than an archaeological condition. It is a psychological one, a profound unraveling of cultural memory that invites us to ask not just how a people disappeared, but how they were forgotten. This is where history meets the human mind, where we must explore the fragile mechanisms by which communities remember their past, or are compelled to forget it. One of the most powerful frameworks for understanding this is the concept of structural amnesia. This isn't about a people getting scatterbrained. It's a sociological process where societies, as they evolve, inevitably shed parts of their past that are no longer functionally relevant. Imagine a culture's memory not as a perfect archive, but as a constantly edited story. Details that don't serve the present needs of the group, that don't justify current power structures, reinforce social bonds, or explain the world as it is now, simply fade from the collective narrative. For our shadow empire, this process would have accelerated dramatically after its collapse. As survivors integrated into new communities, what use was there for the intricate knowledge of celestial alignments that no longer predicted reliable floods? Why maintain the complex oral histories of rulers whose divine mandate had proven false? The skills of reading the old script, the recipes for temple rituals, the epic poems of their foundation, these became useless baggage in a harsh new world. The memory of the empire didn't vanish in a single moment. It was hollowed out generation by generation as parents stopped teaching children stories that no longer held meaning for survival. The past was pruned away until only the bare, functional stump of memory remained. This process of forgetting can be violently accelerated by trauma. Psychologists recognize that cataclysmic events can trigger a form of cultural repression, a collective turning away from a past that is too painful to remember. The fall of the empire was not a clean break. It was likely a protracted period of horror, famine, disease, and social violence. The survivors carried not just physical scars, but profound psychological wounds. Remembering the grandeur of what was lost could have been unbearable when contrasted with the brutal reality of their new existence. Dr. Anya Sharma, who has studied this intersection of archaeology and memory, suggests that trauma can sever a people from their history as effectively as any invading army. The past becomes a country they cannot safely visit. To forge a new identity and simply endure, they may have had to collectively agree to stop speaking of the old world, to let its name die on their lips as a necessary act of psychological survival. The great cities, then, didn't just fall into silence. They may have been deliberately silenced by the very descendants of those who built them, their memory sacrificed on the altar of daily survival. Yet this is not the end of the story. Across the globe, other cultures have faced near-total erasure and have mounted incredible journeys to reclaim their past. The revival of the Hebrew language in modern Israel is a stunning example of a linguistic memory being pulled back from the brink of oblivion through sheer, deliberate effort. The Maori of New Zealand, after generations of colonial suppression, are now using legal frameworks, education, and digital archives to revitalize their language and traditions, stitching their cultural memory back together from fragments. Even the Maya, whose great cities were swallowed by the jungle, never truly lost their connection to the past. Their descendants preserved kernels of identity, stories, and calendar systems that provided a foundation for modern scholars to rebuild an understanding of their ancient achievements. These are stories of incredible resilience, proving that cultural memory, though fragile, can possess a stubborn, subterranean tenacity. This struggle highlights a profound truth about identity. Memory studies expert Professor Ilya Petrov argues that a culture's identity is not a monument but a conversation. It is a continuous, dynamic argument with the past. Even when that conversation is interrupted for centuries, the potential to restart it never fully disappears. The seeds of memory can lie dormant in the soil of a landscape, in a single folktale, or in the shape of a cooking pot, waiting for the right conditions to germinate. This is why the scattered folk memories we discussed earlier, the Karabi legend of the stone weavers or the coastal tales of the silent traders, are so significant. They are not just quaint stories, they are the dormant seeds of that conversation, the last faint echoes of an argument that was never truly finished. The battle our shadow empire faced then was not just against invading sands or shifting climates. It was a battle against oblivion itself, a psychological war fought in the minds of its children's children. Their ultimate silence forces a humbling realization upon us that every culture, from the most powerful empire to the smallest community, is engaged in this same eternal struggle. We all fight to be remembered. We build archives, write histories, and tell stories to our children, building a fragile levee against the relentless tide of time that seeks to smooth away all distinctiveness. The silence of this lost civilization is not their failure, it is our warning. It reminds us that memory is not a passive inheritance but an active, continuous creation, a story we must choose to tell and retell, lest we too, one day, become nothing more than a whisper in the wind, a puzzle for some future people to wonder at. But as we wield these powerful new technologies to uncover the past, we are forced to pause and confront a profound and deeply human question. Just because we can unearth a silent civilization, does that mean we should? The quest for knowledge is a powerful driver, but it must be tempered by an even greater responsibility, the ethical duty to approach the vanished with reverence, not recklessness. This is no longer the era of the colonial adventurer, hacking through jungles and hauling away treasures for foreign museums. Modern archaeology has undergone a seismic shift, recognizing that the bones of the dead and the fragments of their lives are not merely data points, but sacred connections to people who, though silent, deserve our utmost respect. The very act of digging into a civilization that cannot speak for itself places a heavy moral burden on our shoulders, a duty to ensure that in our desire to give them a voice, we do not simply speak over them or, worse, perpetuate a new form of cultural violence. This ethical framework begins with the most fundamental principle, the treatment of human remains. For decades, the display of mummies and skeletons in glass museum cases was standard practice, a spectacle that drew crowds but deeply violated the spiritual beliefs of countless descendant communities. Today, leading archaeological associations like the World Archaeological Congress have established strict codes of ethics that prioritize dignity above display. The rule is clear: human remains are not exhibits. They are the final resting place of an individual, and they must be treated with the same respect we would afford our own ancestors. This means that if remains must be exhumed for study, it is done with meticulous care, with the goal of learning what is necessary for the historical record, details about health, diet, and cause of death, and then, wherever possible, they are returned to the earth with dignity. For our shadow empire, this presents a unique challenge. With no known direct descendants to consult, who decides what is respectful? The answer increasingly lies in collaboration with the local communities who now inhabit these lands, whose own cultural and spiritual beliefs about death and ancestry must guide the process, ensuring that the silence of the past is not compounded by the arrogance of the present. This collaborative spirit extends far beyond the grave to the very narrative we construct. The question of who has the right to tell this story is central to modern ethical exploration. For too long, the history of erased cultures was written exclusively by Western academics, their interpretations often filtered through a colonial lens that saw these societies as puzzles to be solved rather than complex human experiences to be understood. This approach risks cultural appropriation, taking sacred symbols, artistic motifs, or ritual objects and stripping them of their original meaning to serve a foreign narrative or, worse, for commercial gain. To avoid this, the principle of "nothing about us without us" is now paramount. This means archaeologists don't just arrive with a team and a digging permit. They begin by building relationships. They engage with local communities not as hired labor, but as essential partners and knowledge holders. Elders may have oral histories that provide context no satellite image ever could. Local artisans might understand ancient crafting techniques in a way that a lab analysis cannot capture. By sharing authority over the story, we move from extraction to collaboration, ensuring that the legacy of the Shadow Empire enriches its homeland first and foremost. Nowhere is this partnership more tested than in the fiery debate over artifact repatriation. The world's great museums are filled with the magnificent artifacts of lost cultures, often acquired under dubious circumstances during the colonial era. The beautiful lapis lazuli necklace from our Shadow Empire might currently sit in a display case in London or Paris, thousands of miles from the soil that nurtured the civilization that created it. The argument for keeping it there has traditionally been one of preservation and access, that these institutions can protect it and show it to a global audience. But the counter-argument is powerful and moral. These objects are not merely art, they are sacred fragments of a cultural identity, and they belong with the people and the landscape from which they sprang. Returning them is an act of restorative justice, a way to repair the historical wounds of exploitation and allow the silent to be honored in their own home. It is a complex process fraught with legal and logistical challenges, but it is a necessary conversation. Each artifact repatriated is a small piece of a stolen soul being returned, a step toward mending the silence not with our words but with our actions. Ultimately, these ethical guidelines from respecting burial sites to repatriating treasures are not just bureaucratic rules, they are a new way of listening. They are an acknowledgement that our pursuit of knowledge must be guided by humility and a deep sense of care. We are not the owners of this past, we are its temporary stewards. Our responsibility is to approach the silence not as a void to be filled with our own theories, but as a sacred space to be entered with permission. We must use our technology not as a scalpel to dissect, but as a stethoscope to listen carefully for the faint, enduring heartbeat of a people who built, loved, and dreamed. By grounding our quest in this morality, we ensure that the story we eventually tell is not one of conquest and discovery, but one of partnership and reverence, a story worthy of the brilliant, shadowed empire we are so privileged to finally meet. Yet the most profound shift is not in the tools we use, but in the spirit with which we wield them. The future of this exploration is increasingly collaborative, a global conversation that bridges the gap between high-tech laboratories and ancient oral traditions. A groundbreaking project set to begin next year, known as the Sunken Serpent Initiative, embodies this new ethos. It is a partnership between a European university's maritime archaeology department, a local historical society from the region, and the elders of the Karabi people, whose legends of the stone weavers we discussed earlier. Using the Karabi oral histories that speak of a great port city that drank the sea, the team will employ advanced sub-bottom profilers to search a specific stretch of coastline for submerged structures. This is no longer a story of foreign experts arriving with all the answers. It is a fusion of deep-time memory with cutting-edge science, where a legend passed down for generations gets to guide a multi-million-dollar research vessel to its target. This collaborative model ensures that the discoveries made will be interpreted through multiple lenses, enriching our understanding and ensuring the legacy of the empire benefits, and involves the descendants of those who have lived in its shadow for millennia. The ultimate puzzle, of course, remains their voice. The undeciphered script is the locked door at the end of every corridor we explore, and here, too, the future is blindingly bright. The same artificial intelligence that can map a city from the sky is now being trained to read a language no living person understands. A consortium of computational linguists and data scientists has launched the Voices from the Clay project, feeding high-resolution images of every known inscription, from grand stelae to broken pottery shards, into a neural network of unimaginable complexity. This AI isn't looking for a Rosetta Stone, it's looking for patterns of such subtle recurrence that they escape the human eye, the grammatical skeleton of the language. It analyzes the frequency of sign clusters, their positional relationships, and their evolution over centuries, searching for the underlying logic. The goal is not for the AI to translate, but for it to identify the most probable grammatical rules and core vocabulary, providing human linguists with a structured framework to finally begin the work of true decipherment. It is a long shot, but for the first time, it feels like a possible one. We may be on the cusp of the greatest breakthrough in this entire saga. The moment we can finally read their words, hear their names, and listen as the silence that has persisted for 3,000 years is broken, not by our speculation, but by their own long-lost voices. This is the exhilarating promise of the next chapter. We are no longer simply digging in the dirt. We are assembling a panoramic, multi-layered portrait of a world, using every tool at our disposal from DNA sequencers to satellite constellations. We are moving from asking what happened to them to who were they truly. Each unanswered question, the full extent of their territory, the nature of their religious beliefs, the precise trigger of their collapse is no longer a permanent barrier, but a temporary frontier, a mystery that is actively being pursued. The story of this shadow empire is not a closed book gathering dust on a shelf. It is a live feed, a document that is being updated in real time with every new satellite pass, every genetic sequence, and every collaborative conversation with a local storyteller. The silence is not an ending, it is an invitation, a vast and echoing space waiting to be filled with the sounds of discovery, and we are all now privileged to be listening in. And so our journey through the Empire of Shadows draws to a close, yet the true impact of this exploration is only just beginning to settle within us. We have walked the silent grid of their streets, marveled at aqueducts that defied their time, and held the humble toys of their children, and in doing so, we have gathered more than just facts and artifacts. We have collected a profound sense of weight, the heavy and beautiful burden of a civilization that speaks its loudest through its overwhelming silence. Their story is not one told in triumphant inscriptions or the biographies of kings. It is a narrative written in negative space, a history defined by its absence, and it is in that void that we find its most powerful lesson on the breathtaking fragility and the stubborn resilience of human achievement. This entire investigation challenges us to do more than simply look backward with wonder. It holds up a mirror to our own modern world and asks us urgent questions about our place in the long arc of history. If a society this advanced, this interconnected, and this brilliant could fade into near total obscurity, what does that say about the permanence of our own digital age? We live in an era of unprecedented documentation, where every thought and image is seemingly captured forever in the cloud. And yet we must ask ourselves, are we truly any more secure against the erosive forces of time? Our own legacy is stored on fragile servers and in formats that risk becoming obsolete within decades. A modern-day library of Alexandria that could theoretically vanish with a catastrophic solar flare or a cascading systems failure. The Silent Empire reminds us that preservation is not a passive act, it is a conscious, continuous effort. It implores us to appreciate the living cultures around us today, to listen to the stories of elders, to support the preservation of languages at risk of extinction, and to advocate for the protection of our shared physical heritage, from the great monuments to the modest, everyday places that hold our collective memory. Let this deep dive into history's greatest enigmas be more than just a passive viewing experience. Let it be a spark that ignites a lifelong curiosity and a deep, abiding respect for the past in all its complex, incomplete glory. History is not a simple list of dates and dead kings. It is a dynamic, ongoing conversation between what we know, what we've lost, and what we have yet to discover. It is a mystery that is never truly solved, And that is its greatest gift. It forever invites us to look closer, to ask better questions, and to listen more intently for the whispers that linger just beneath the surface of the known world. I would love to continue this conversation with you. Please share your own thoughts in the comments below. What echoes of lost civilizations resonate most deeply with you? Was it the haunting beauty of their undeciphered script, the tragedy of their environmental collapse, or the intimate humanity of a child's toy left behind in a hurry? Your perspectives make this community so rich. If you enjoyed this journey to the edges of history, be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. We have so many more deep dives into history's greatest enigmas planned, from the submerged ruins of ancient coastlines to the unsolved codes that have baffled cryptographers for centuries. Together, let's keep listening to the whispers of time, honoring the silent, and ensuring that the stories of the past, however faint, are never complete.